Chapter 7076. The Enemy of My Enemy. The Omaris disappeared from the plates with a speed that made Sonny a bit full of himself. He smiled proudly, and then looked at Nephis. "So, what do you think about the mess we're in?" She put down her utensils, looked at the empty plate with a hint of regret, and then asked, "That Mordred, the rank of his aspect is the same as ours?" Sonny nodded, prompting her to frown. While she thought, he reluctantly added, "He is also older and more powerful than us, and possesses more knowledge than anyone in the waking world should have. Other than that, he is actually, I don't know what he is. I just feel that something is very wrong with that guy. Regardless, he is dead set on destroying Clan Valor. It is just hard to tell how he is going to go about accomplishing that goal." Changing Star remained silent for a few moments, then said evenly, "He is going to search for allies." Sonny's expression grew a little darker. "Mordred is not exactly a team player." Nephis slowly shook her head. "It doesn't matter. No matter how powerful he has become, it won't be enough to reach his goals. The enemy is too strong. Their power is too absolute." She did not say it, but from the grim expression on her face, Sonny could guess what Changing Star was thinking about, that she was in the exact same position, which did not bode well. He grimaced. "So do you think that we should expect to find the bastard on our doorstep one day? The enemy of my enemy? And all that?" Sonny was not looking forward to meeting Mordred again, let alone getting entangled with him in any shape or form. As far as he was concerned, the Prince of Nothing would bring nothing but trouble. Nephis frowned, then said with uncertainty, "No, I doubt it." Well, if she was right, that was a relief. At that moment, Cassie deactivated her communicator and turned to face them. "The Firekeepers have reached the Immortal Flame Manor. They are putting on a show to make it seem like there are all kinds of activity going on inside. Hopefully that is going to make most people think that you are there with them. You should not be bothered by anyone here for a while." She paused for a moment, then sighed. "But that is not going to last long. Maybe a week. The rest of us should not linger as well. It would be strange if Kai, Effie, and I are not seen at the manor. We will leave shortly and join the Firekeepers," which would leave Sonny and Nephis alone. He did not know how to feel about that. Effie, meanwhile, glanced at the empty plates and said in a petulant tone, "I live here as well, you know." Cassie turned to her with a deadpan expression. "Not for the next week, you don't." As the huntress let out a sigh, the blind girl hesitated for a few seconds, and then said, "I am also in contact with the government representatives and Clan Valor. They understand the pressure you are facing so soon after you return, so they are willing to be patient. For now, that will buy you a short buffer before they come knocking. Be ready to receive some requests for public appearances and so on in a week or two, as well as demands to resume the negotiations. We can stall for a time, but not forever." Nephis looked at her calmly, then asked, "What about Song and Night?" Cassie frowned. "Clan Song might try to get involved in the negotiations, but I don't expect them to be too forceful. They are in a more advantageous position than Valor right now, after all. As for the House of Night, they are remaining strangely passive these days for some reason. Maybe they just know that they have less to offer than the other two great clans and don't want to bother." Sonny had a different explanation for why the Nightwalkers had less time to participate in the schemes of the two greater clans, but chose to remain silent. The information provided to him by Master Jet had been shared in confidence. Even if he wanted to, he couldn't go around spreading it. The blind girl sighed, then rose from her seat. "Try to rest well during this week, Neph. Don't neglect your recovery. We know that you are strong, but no one is truly infallible. Perhaps none of us has experienced as much pain as you had in these past few years, but we faced our share, some more than others." She briefly faced Sonny, then turned away and lowered her head. "So, we understand how precarious it is to go on as if nothing happened without giving the old wounds a chance to heal. Don't be stubborn and have some pity on yourself, for a change." Nephis looked at her. After a few moments, a pale smile appeared on her face. "You don't have to lecture me, Cass. You are overestimating my resolve. I am more than willing to rest for a while. Happy, even. The words rest and happy hardly fit in the image of changing star they were accustomed to. But no one said anything. An ordeal like the one she had gone through was bound to change anyone, even someone as determined and unflinching as Nephis. Cassie smiled, and then addressed Effie and Kai. "Let's go then. There's a lot of work to be done at the manor. We need to renovate it a little and make some adjustments to convert it into a proper clan headquarters." Soon, they said their goodbyes and left. The PTV came online and swiftly disappeared from view. Sunny and Nephis were left alone in the cozy gray house. He hesitated for a bit, and then looked at her with a bit of awkwardness. "Well, make yourself at home, I guess. Actually, let me give you a tour." Chapter 777, Blind Date. In one of the most upscale districts situated near the heart of the city, a fancy, but not overly opulent restaurant was welcoming the first few visitors of the day. While some owners made a point of following the archaic traditions and hired human servers, this particular establishment was aimed at a mostly young audience. For that reason, a lot of things were automated and could be easily accessed through personal communicators of the patrons. The chefs were still human, of course. They were also true masters of their craft. Every ingredient used by them was natural as well, while some were even imported from other quadrants. The interior design was similarly luxurious, with natural wood visible everywhere. Authentic paintings from centuries past hung on the walls, protected by thick sheets of transparent alloy. Everything was expensive, stylish, and screamed of class. Such a restaurant, of course, was only accessible to citizens of the highest ranks who could afford to dine here. It was especially popular among young heirs of the city elite and had a reputation for being a prime spot for arranged dates and romantic occasions. Currently, a couple of such meetings were taking place inside, with wealthy young men and women going through the awkward motions of attending a blind date arranged for them by their families. Strangely, the most striking visitor of the famed restaurant sat alone, as if her date was running late. The young woman seemed to be in her mid-20s, but possessed elegance and grace that spoke of strange maturity. She was exquisitely beautiful, with a supple figure and flawless skin. The beauty was wearing a stylish red dress and a black leather jacket. A few tasteful pieces of jewelry adorned her fingers and delicate neck. Other female visitors of the restaurant couldn't help but feel exasperated by the fact that their dates seemed to be unable to stop stealing glances at the beautiful woman. The men, meanwhile, were all wondering what kind of a fool would keep such a belle waiting. If only they were in his place, they wouldn't be so tardy. Finally, the doors opened, and a new visitor came in. The young man looked around, scratched the back of his head, and then headed toward the table, where the striking beauty sat alone. Sitting down, he smiled sheepishly and said, "Sorry for being late. I hope you did not have to wait too long." The young woman smiled politely, revealing her pearly white teeth. "No problem at all." She studied the young man for a few moments, and then said with a bit of reproach in her pleasant, velvety voice, "I hate to say it, but you don't look like the images I was shown at all." He looked down, as if embarrassed. "Oh, I had to wear something inconspicuous. Walking around as my usual self would be a bit too ostentatious. However, isn't it the same for you? All that makeup to hide your complexion?" The young woman frowned. "It is a cosmetic memory, I'll have you know. Regardless, I have already ordered something to eat. You can peruse the menu while we wait." The young man hesitated, then looked around with an amused expression. Finally, he asked, "How do I do that?" She glanced at him with curiosity. "You don't know? Have you never been to a proper restaurant before?" The young man smiled and shook his head, then said wistfully, "To tell you the truth, this is my first time visiting a restaurant. I was raised in the dream realm, after all. I only returned to the waking world when I was around 13. Many things here seem very strange to me." With that, Mordred fumbled with his communicator for a bit and finally managed to open the menu. The body he was wearing used a biometric lock, at least otherwise, he wouldn't have known how to access the communicator at all. He looked at all the options projected in front of him and asked, "What do you recommend?" The beauty smiled. "I doubt that we have similar tastes." At that moment, the dish she had ordered finally arrived. It was a steak, prepared so rare that it barely looked cooked at all. The young woman elegantly sliced a small piece and brought it to her sensual lips, which were as red as blood. Mordred observed her with a pleasant expression. "Ah, yes. I've heard that you and your sisters follow a very special diet, Lady Song." The young woman licked her lips and looked at him with a neutral expression. "Just call me Seishan. There's no need to be formal." He smiled. "So, Seishan, why did she send you of all people? Are you so expendable that the queen does not mind sacrificing you to me, should the date go badly?" Song Seishan calmly ate another piece of the steak, then wiped her lips with a napkin. "Why would our date go badly? We have a common goal after all. Our clan is your best chance to achieve it." Mordred thought for a bit, then nodded and sighed. "True. However, with that Antarctica thing going on, I would have thought that she would be reluctant to move forward. After all, it's not the best time to do anything drastic." Seishan studied the Prince of War for a few moments, and then smiled. "Oh, on the contrary, we think that the event in Antarctica sets the best stage to do something drastic." He hesitated for a while, then shrugged. "Well, fair enough. So, what now? Do I have to kneel and recite a vow, kiss your ring, or do something else?" The beauty shook her head. "Usually you would have had to sign a contract with a drop of your blood. However, considering your propensity to change, attires that would hardly do anything, wouldn't it?" She smiled. "So, there's no need. Welcome to Clan Song, Prince Mordred. I look forward to all the great things we will accomplish together." Mordred reciprocated her smile, then chose a couple of options in the menu and pressed them. Then he sighed and said with a bit of amusement, "Ah, it feels strange to be adopted." Chapter 778, In the Shadows. Eventually, Sunny and Nephis ended up in his underground dojo. Changing Star looked around, her gaze lingering on the racks of training weapons and the deactivated sleeping pod that stood forlornly in its alcove, all but forgotten by its former occupant. After a few moments of silence, she asked, "Do you make use of all these weapons?" Sunny glanced at the training equipment, lingered for a moment, then shook his head. "Yes and no. In the past 2 years, I did expand my repertoire to include all kinds of sharp implements, but I practice with something better." He was still most confident when wielding swords akin to Azure Blade, Midnight Shard, and his Serpentine Odachi. His proficiency with spears was also quite high, and he was steadily improving his archery skill. However, while Sunny had learned enough to feel comfortable with other types of weapons as well, he had a long way to go before truly mastering them. Nephis nodded thoughtfully. "Do you use the Soul Serpent?" Sunny stared at her for a moment, then looked away. Yes, he was reminded of the shadow bond that connected them beyond its main function. It also allowed Sunny to peer into some of Changing Star's secrets. However, she was able to learn a lot of his as well. Sunny had suspected that this was the case from the very start, but now those suspicions were confirmed. He remained silent for a few moments, then suddenly grinned. "Were you surprised?" Nephis looked at him, hesitated for a moment, and said, "I was. Very, very much." She sighed, sat down on the floor, and crossed her legs. "I always knew that you were extraordinary. I just didn't think that you possessed a divine aspect, too. To be honest, I thought that I was the first." Sunny sat down opposite her and shook his head. "Yeah, I thought so too, but neither of us was the first. It was Mordred instead. He is older than us by 4 or 5 years, and had his first nightmare when he was 12. So he received a divine aspect when you were around 8, and I was around 7. He paused, and said with a bitter smile, "Come to think of it, he probably became a sleeper around the time my mother died. Oh, your mother is fine, by the way. Cassie and I visited her from time to time while you were gone." As a hint of emotion appeared on Neff's face, she lowered her head. "Thank you." Then, she lingered for a moment and asked, "Do you mind telling me where the divine memory in your possession came from? The Weaver's Mask?" Sunny smiled darkly. "Do I mind? I do. But I'll tell you anyway. I found it below the cathedral in the Dark City, on an ancient corpse that turned to dust as soon as I took the mask from it." Changing Star tilted her head a little. "Do you mind telling me what it does?" He laughed. "Why not? I'll tell you. It can reverse one's flaw. A sudden silence settled in the dark chamber. Nephis looked at him, a hint of longing and pain reflecting in her striking eyes. Sunny grinned. Why? Do you want to take it from me? All you have to do is to say the word. It's not like I can refuse. She stared at him for a long time, then silently turned away and did not say anything. Sunny's grin turned somber. Good decision. Did you think that it will save you from the pain? It won't. The mask does not nullify the flaw. It just reverses it. No matter what, the flaw is still a curse. By now, we both should have a good sense about such things. Chances are, the new curse would be more terrible than the old. Right now, you have to burn yourself alive every time you actively use your aspect. With the help of the mask, you would most likely be burning without reprieve, forever, unless you were using it. He grew silent, and then added, The mask can also kill you in many other ways. It is too powerful to be used lightly, at least by the likes of us. Nephis hesitated for a few moments, then gritted her teeth. It is fine. I don't need to be liberated from my flaw. I don't need a powerful memory to uplift me. I myself am enough. Sunny stared at her, then shook his head. You are exactly the same. You did not change at all. I thought that 2 years of despair would have made you a little smarter. But you are still clinging to your deranged dreams, aren't you? She looked at him, remained silent for a while, and then smiled with the corner of her mouth. Despite the smile, however, her eyes remained calm and cold. 2 years? No, I've been desperate for much longer than that, Sunny. Why would I change now? He let out a long sigh, then looked to the side. Indeed. So Aster, Song, Vale, they are your next targets, aren't they? She nodded silently, prompting him to add, You told me once that just knowing these words can get a person killed. However, I went ahead and did some digging of my own. Aster, Song, and Vale are Asterian, Key Song, and Anvil of Valor, correct? The former members of your father's cohort? Nephis nodded again, looking at him intensely. Sunny scowled. They are also known as the Sovereigns, because they have conquered the fourth nightmare. They are one rank above the Transcendent. They are supreme, are they not? Without saying anything, she just nodded for the third time. Sunny hesitated for a while, and then asked, They killed your father, didn't they? Nephis continued to look at him, white flame dancing in her eyes. After some time, she sighed. Yes, I believe so. My father, he died when I was 4. Before that, the members of his cohort were like aunts and uncles to me. Aster, Song, Vale, that was what he called them. They were his friends. Her expression turned dark. But after he was gone, something changed. I was too little to understand, but none of these friends came to our help. Instead, the immortal Flame Clan fell while their clans soared. And a couple of years after that, the first assassin was sent to eliminate me. Sunny rubbed his face, then asked in an exasperated voice, But why? Why did they turn on him? Nephis looked away. I don't know. He frowned and hesitated for a moment. He had suspected that he would receive such an answer. However, there was one small detail that did not make sense to him. If they are so mighty and powerful, then how are you still alive? Why did the Sovereigns fail to kill you? All they had to do was pay you a visit in person. No amount of awakened guards, or even masters, would have been able to stop even one of them. Neph glanced at him and said, her voice even, They can't. Sunny raised his eyebrows. What do you mean, they can't? Is there some agreement that prevents them from acting directly? Changing Star slowly shook her head. No, they simply can't. The Sovereigns, it is hard for them to enter the waking world. Chapter 779, Unmoored. Noticing the astonished look on his face, Nephis sighed. You must have felt a change in your connection to the dream realm and the waking world when you ascended, didn't you? Sunny slowly nodded, remembering how he first explored his ability to enter the dream realm physically. The process wasn't instantaneous, but it also wasn't too burdensome. He just had to concentrate, feel his connection to the anchor, and reach for it. After a few minutes, he would poof out of existence in reality and appear near the gateway in the ivory tower. Leaving a tether in the waking world wasn't hard either, although it took more time and some essence. It was as instinctual as summoning memories or commanding echoes. With the knowledge Sonny had received from being collared in the Red Colosseum, he understood that this hinted at the fact that traveling between the two worlds was one of the functions of the spell, as opposed to something tied to his aspect. After he nodded, Changing Star continued. Awakened establish a connection with the dream realm by anchoring themselves to a gateway. Ascended expand on that connection, making them less tied to the waking world and thus capable of traveling between the two at will. Transcendent exist in a state of perfect balance. They are connected to both worlds in equal measure, which makes them independent of gateways. In a sense, they are the gateway, which is why they can even bring another person with them in their travels. She paused and then added in a somber tone, however, that balance is broken once a person becomes supreme. It shifts, tying them to the dream realm instead of the real world. In truth, I don't know much about the power of the sovereigns. All I know is that it is restricted in the waking world and that they can't enter it freely. That is why none of them could harm me directly. Sonny stared, shocked. That revelation, it made so much sense. It explained so many things, from how Nephis was able to survive, to why the government still wielded a lot of power in the waking world. It also gave credence to Master Jet's statement that the sovereigns had long given up on reality. Was that what awaited Sonny if he somehow became supreme one day himself? Feeling as if the world was spinning around him, Sonny frowned and then asked in a dark tone, "What happens if one becomes sacred then? Would they lose their connection to the real world entirely?" Nephis shrugged. "I don't know, no one knows. No one has ever conquered the fifth nightmare after all." A heavy silence settled between them. After a while, Sonny suddenly asked, "What are domains?" He had not forgotten that detail either. Back on the Ashen Barrow, Nephis had asked him which domain he belonged to. He had not known what she meant then, and he did not know now. Neph sighed, "That I am not entirely sure myself. All I know is that each sovereign rules over a domain. It is an expression of a function of the aspect, distinct from abilities, but sharing a lot in common with them. In practice, it is synonymous with their authority and the territories they control, as well as people that serve them." She paused for a few moments, and then added grimly, "The sovereigns are already immensely powerful, but within their domains they are practically invincible. Not even saints can hope to challenge them." Sonny let out a stifled laugh. "And these are the people you want to destroy?" Changing Star smiled. "Why not? Nothing is absolute, Sonny. 2 years ago, I would have never challenged a sovereign. Today, I am still too weak to do it. I am still insignificant. But will it still be the case 2 years from now? Will I still be as weak, and will they still be as powerful? What about in 5 years? Things never remain the same. Everything is always changing, even gods can die. Asterion, Kisong, and Anvil of Valor are no gods, so why should they be spared?" Sonny shook his head. "I don't know. Forget about 2 years from now, or 5, or 10. How are you going to survive now? How are you going to avoid being squashed by them today? What is your actual plan?" Nephis looked at him for a long time, and then sighed. "I don't have a plan." She remained silent for a moment before adding evenly, "Yet." Sonny did not know what to say, so he simply shook his head. It was pointless trying to dissuade her from her obsession, regardless. Nephis wanted to destroy the spell, and the sovereigns stood in her way. It was as simple as that, with an added weight of good old-fashioned vengeance. He was not so sure that she was completely misguided, either not anymore. Sonny wanted nothing to do with the sovereigns and the great clans, but was there really a choice? Simply by daring to be someone and possess something, he put himself in their crosshairs. As long as he had something of value, others would want to either take it away or make him serve them. That was the nature of the world. Since the great clans insisted on being in control of humanity, there was no escape from them. Unless Sonny wanted to spend the rest of his life as a hermit in the dream realm, he would have to interact with the domains in one way or another. He would have to allow himself to be controlled as well. A bitter smile appeared on his lips. Isn't that ironic? Why was it so hard to gain even a tiny bit of freedom in this damned world? Sunny wanted to become strong to be free, but the stronger he became, the more formidable powers wanted to subjugate him. Now, it seemed that the only choice he had was to either give up or become even stronger, still stronger than anyone and anything. Which was more or less exactly what Nephis was trying to achieve, even if for a different reason. He sighed and then waved a hand dismissively. Anyway, I'm tired of this conversation. Want to spar? Chapter 780, Friendly Spar. Sunny and Nephis stood opposite each other, holding training swords. Both felt more than a little disturbed by how much this scene resembled their bitter confrontation at the very top of the Crimson Spire. Of course, today, the situation was completely different. They were just going for a friendly spar, not a battle to the death. There were no stakes in this training fight, no emotional investment, no complicated mixture of regret, fury, and resentment. So why did Sunny feel as though he had to prove something? Forcing himself to relax, he glanced at Nephis and attacked. Their swords met with a deafening clangor. A few seconds later, Sunny jumped away and shouted, "Stop, stop, stop!" Changing Star froze while he looked around, breathing heavily. Sunny gritted his teeth and spat a muffled curse. Damnation. His idea to have a spar might not have been the wisest one he ever had. Yes, the underground dojo was designed specifically to allow Awakened to train their powers. It was isolated, reinforced, and heavily armored, able to transform into an impregnable bunker in case a gate opened nearby and a tide of nightmare creatures flooded the district. The interior was furnished with heavy plates of armor-grade ceramic alloy and supplied with training equipment meant to withstand the rigors of Awakened power. However, Sunny and Nephis weren't Awakened anymore. They were full-fledged masters, and abnormal ones at that. The alloy sword in his hand was shattered. A few plates on the floor were broken. If this continued, the repair bill for the dojo was going to really sting Sunny's wallet. More than that, Nephis was not exactly at her best. She had just returned to the waking world yesterday. Before that, she had been a sleeper, which meant that she had no experience of controlling soul essence whatsoever. Let alone doing it with intricate precision and efficiency of a master. She had never even done it crudely as an Awakened. Sunny could tell exactly how chaotic and unrestrained the flow of her essence was, because Shadow Dance now allowed him to sense the movement of the mystical energy through the bodies of his opponents. Sure, every master had an instinctual understanding of how to augment their physicality with essence, but it still took some time to get used to it, and even more to master it. However, every Ascended before Changing Star enjoyed having the experience of making the first steps on that long and arduous road as an Awakened. In fact, by the time Awakened reached Ascension, controlling essence was as natural to them as breathing. Not so much for Nephis. Her return as a master might have been miraculous, but it also deprived her of a lot of things that people who did not break the natural order of things usually enjoyed. She was out of her depth. As Changing Star stared at the broken sword in her hands with a deep frown, Sunny waved a hand in the air and forced out a smile. That you'll have to spend some time learning how to guide your soul essence. After that, you will have to spend even more time relearning how to fight with its help. I had years of practice already, so fighting at full force won't do us any good. He thought for a bit, and then said, "All right, let's try this again, but without using any essence at all. It will be a pure test of skill." Sure, Nephis had one more core than him, but with all things considered, if both of them neglected using essence or augmenting themselves with their abilities, the gap in physical prowess should not have been too overwhelming. Once again, they stood opposite each other and concentrated. Each discarded their broken weapons and took new ones. A moment later, they clashed. This time, things went better. However, not by much. One of the problems was their battle techniques. Due to Shadow Dance and his familiarity with Nephis, it didn't take Sunny long to sense the core of her style. It had changed a lot and matured over the past 2 years, but so did his mastery of his aspect legacy. Although Sunny could not master the style yet, he attuned himself to its flow and cadence enough to be able to predict some of Neph's moves with a good degree of precision. The problem then was that Changing Star herself could do more or less the same. Her ability to discern, predict, and control patterns of combat was not based in affinity to shadows, and was sufficiently different from it, but achieved a similar result. It was the product of her talent, training, and incredible combat intelligence. As the result, Sunny was able to somewhat predict what Nephis was thinking of doing, while she could predict that he had predicted her actions and change her approach on the fly, which he would also discern, and so on. It was very confusing. Sunny had never found himself in a battle that demanded so much mental gymnastics before. He was not even entirely sure what was happening. There had to be a solution for this predicament, of course, but he had no time to come up with one yet. However, that was just half of the problem. The other half was that Neff's essence control was so rudimentary and bad that she couldn't even prevent herself from instinctively using it. As the result, Sunny had to endure sudden outbursts of speed, strength, and agility that were too chaotic to predict. Because he was holding himself back, handling this pressure was rather troublesome. At some point, Changing Star overdid it during one of her strikes, causing her second training sword to shatter as well. The jagged end slid forward and bit into Sunny's cheek. Drops of blood fell to the floor. Sunny jerked back and grimaced, feeling that the left side of his face was seriously torn. The wound was bad enough to cause blood weave to shed a few drops. It was nothing that he wouldn't be able to heal quickly, of course, but it still hurt. Before he could say anything, Nephis suddenly reached forward and placed a cool palm on his torn cheek. In the next moment, a brilliant white radiance illuminated the underground dojo. His pain instantly disappeared, replaced instead by relief and gentle warmth. He felt as though he was being cleansed by something pure, precious, and sacred. A pristine white flame. Standing close to each other, the two of them froze for a moment. Neff's hand rested on Sunny's cheek, which was swiftly healing. The soft radiance emanating from her skin reflected in her calm gray eyes. Beneath that calmness, there were pain and suffering in them. Sunny moved slightly, wishing to say that she didn't have to do this. Before he had the time to speak, however, something unexpected happened. The white flames suddenly seeped under his skin and then engulfed him. Chapter 781, The Brightest Light. Sunny shuddered, thinking that he was caught on fire, but then froze. Somehow, it did not seem like the white radiance was harming him at all. It just enveloped his body, making his skin shine with a suffused glow. However, it was also not healing him. Instead, Sunny stared at Nephis with astonishment and asked in a low voice, "What? What is happening?" From the confused look on her face, she did not do whatever it was that had happened on purpose. Changing Star took an involuntary step back, removing her cool palm from his cheek, and briefly glanced at her hand. The white glow was gone from it. I don't know." Sunny opened his eyes wide and looked down on his shining body. Very strangely, he felt empowered. In fact, his condition was very similar to how he felt when one of his shadows was wrapped around him. His physical prowess seemed to have doubled. There were small differences, of course. The augmentation of Neff's flame seemed to be more furious and active, centered around strength and resilience. It also filled him with a soft, pleasant feeling of warmth. What was more, it did not only affect his body, it reached into his soul as well, igniting and enhancing it. The shadow essence flowing through his body became much more potent and vibrant, full of greater energy. Sunny blinked. Did Nephis just augment him with her aspect ability? Since when can you augment other people? Changing Star seemed to be as bewildered as he was, even though it did not show on her face. "I can't. This was not supposed to happen. My dormant ability only evolved to include soul augmentation when I ascended. It never evolved to be able to spread to other people." Sunny opened his mouth, then closed it again. Eventually, he hissed, "Then how do you explain this?" "I'm glowing." He waved his hand in the air, causing the shadows of the underground dojo to move and shift. Then, a bizarre thought entered his mind. Wait. Following his suspicion, Sunny lingered for a moment, and then commanded the gloomy shadow to wrap itself around Nephis. The shadow did not even roll its eyes as it usually did when receiving an order. It eagerly slid forward and swiftly wrapped itself around the lithe, slender body of Changing Star. Neph flinched. "Huh?" She studied her arms with wide eyes. Her ivory skin had turned gray, as if covered by dark film. Then she made her hands into fists and frowned. "I feel stronger." The two of them remained silent for a few moments, processing the implications of this unexpected discovery. Usually, Sunny felt a lot of negative emotions every time he thought about the innate ability of his aspect, Shadow Bond, which tied him to Changing Star's will. On this occasion, however, his curiosity and greed for power briefly overpowered his resentment. If Shadow Bond allowed Nephis and him to augment each other to this degree, what else would they be capable of? Neph seemed to come to the same conclusion. They glanced at each other, understanding the other's thoughts without having to say anything. Sunny hesitated for a moment, then said, "It causes you pain to use your ability. We can stop now." She slowly shook her head. "No, not yet." With that, Sunny simply nodded and commanded the gloomy shadow to return and wrap itself around his body. At the same time, he ordered the other three to do the same. Changing Star, meanwhile, concentrated for a moment, causing the white radiance suffusing his skin to grow many times more intense. Sunny let out an audible gasp. 4 shadows made him 5 times more powerful. That he already knew. Flames summoned by Nephis, who was a tyrant, were more or less akin to 5 additional shadows. In theory, his physical prowess should have grown tenfold as the result. What a stupendous augmentation. Combined with his might as a master, his 4 cores and the subtle but consequential physical enhancement he received from Blood Weave, Sunny should have become monstrously strong. But in reality, the effect was even greater. The shadows and the brilliant light seemed to resonate with each other, making the sum greater than its parts. Sunny turned into a silhouette shrouded in broiling darkness. That darkness, however, was permeated with blinding white light. The light made the darkness deeper, while the darkness made the light much more stark and radiant. He looked like an abyssal spirit of the starlit void. He felt powerful, immensely powerful. Powerful enough to face a saint in a fight. He looked at the training sword grasped in his hand, and easily made the reinforced alloy shatter in his grip. He did not even have to exert a lot of his strength. Deeply stunned, Sunny whispered, "Scary." A few moments later, Nephis sighed and recalled her flames. Sunny allowed his shadows to slide back to the floor. Changing Star looked at him and asked, her voice unsure, "How did it feel?" Sunny remained silent for a while. Eventually, he forced out a pale smile and said, "Like a dream." They stayed in the dojo for the entire night, experimenting with the strange and frighteningly powerful application of their unnatural bond. There were many things they had to explore, even though it was too dangerous to test the limits of this new power here. The last thing Sunny wanted was to completely wreck the foundation of his home. It wouldn't have been fun if the whole building suddenly collapsed. Still, there were a lot of things that they had discovered. First, both Sunny and Nephis could be enhanced by the white flames and the shadows. All of this might could be concentrated on one person, or shared between them in any proportion they chose. Mixing any light into the shadows or even one shadow into the radiant light made the end result more powerful. Secondly, the same could be done to their memories. Pouring all of their power into the cruel sight, for example, made it somewhere around 15 times deadlier. This scale of enhancement went well beyond the confines of its rank, making the somber spear as powerful as a transcendent weapon. Applied to an armor, the augmentation was just as strong. However, doing so would have been a bit wasteful. Memories had no souls, and as such, the part of Changing Star's flames that made a person's soul more active and resilient was wasted on them. It did, however, affect shadows and echoes. Sunny and Nephis tested the full augmentation of their combined aspects on Saint first, and then on the echo of a 6-armed ascended demon that Changing Star possessed. The result was as frightening as what Sunny had experienced himself. As the dawn painted the world in shades of pale violet and lilac, the pair was still cooped up in the underground dojo. Although neither spoke, their eyes were full of thought. Both understood what their discovery meant. Each of them bore a divine aspect. Each was immensely powerful when compared to other ascended. When 2 bearers of divine aspects combined their power, however, imagining what they could do was indeed a bit scary. After a while, Sunny glanced at his communicator and flinched. "Crap, it's morning already. I am going to be late for my lecture." He looked at Nephis, suddenly realizing how tired and spent she looked. Using her ability so much must not have been easy. She simply nodded. "You can go if you wish. I'll rest for a while." Sunny hesitated for a moment, then nodded and used Shadow Step to jump to his closet on the second floor of the house. A few minutes later, he was already running out of the door, wearing civilian clothes that Kai had helped him pick a while ago. Changing Star was left alone. Chapter 782, Grand Teacher. On the way back from school, Rain couldn't think about anything else except for the news that she had heard from her classmates. At first, she had dismissed them as a wild rumor, but then her inquisitive nature forced her to check the respectable government portals to make sure. A minute of research revealed that the rumors were true. Changing Star of the Immortal Flame Clan, the lost hero of the Forgotten Shore, had ascended and returned to the real world. She was alive. Can't be. By now, the news was spreading across the network like wildfire. Rain could tell that many of the passengers riding the train with her were thinking and talking about the same thing. Everyone looked shocked and excited. She did not pay other people any attention, however. There was only one thought on her mind. She had to tell Sunny. Her friend and mentor was a member of Changing Star's cohort, after all. More than that, from the hints she had received from Effie and a short conversation she had had with Sunny, Rain knew that there was much more between the two than simple camaraderie. He had basically admitted as much. Sunny will be so happy. Despite the fact that she was not supposed to have the next lesson with her young tutor for a few days, Rain decided to bring him the news personally, and right away. She simply couldn't wait. Of course, in all her excitement, she had failed to account for the fact that if the news were indeed true, Sunny would have been one of the first people to learn of it. Full of anticipation, Rain rushed from the tram station to her mentor's house, opened the door, and walked inside. Throwing her backpack into the corner by habit, she took off her shoes and shouted, "Sunny, Sunny, are you home? You won't believe." Then, however, the teenage girl froze with her mouth wide open. As she watched in stunned silence, the curtain hanging over the entrance to the guest bedroom parted, and a tall, incredibly beautiful young woman walked into the living room. Suddenly, it seemed as if sunlight pouring through the windows became a little bit brighter. The young woman was slender and graceful, with flawless ivory skin and striking gray eyes. Her face was calm, aloof, and strangely mesmerizing. What shocked Rain much more, however, was that the beautiful stranger's skin glistened with moisture as if she had just left the shower. She was wearing nothing but one of Sunny's black shirts, leaving her long legs mostly bare. And her wet hair. Her hair was of a strange silver-white color. The silver-haired young woman walked toward the kitchen, then stopped and looked at Rain. A hint of confusion appeared on her face. She hesitated for a moment, then said, "Hey." Rain raised a trembling hand and pointed a finger at the stranger's head. Her teeth chattered as she forced out, You're. The beautiful stranger raised an eyebrow and remained silent. Rain finally managed to finish her sentence. "Your Changing Star." The last daughter of the Immortal Flame Clan tilted her head a little, then shrugged. "Yes, I am. Who are you?" Rain swallowed, slowly realizing that she was in the presence of one of the most talented battle commanders and heroes of humanity. A person so renowned that there was hardly anyone in the entire world who did not know her name, and Sunny's Sunny's. Remembering the lessons he had taught her, the teenage girl forced herself to calm down somewhat, and said weakly, I am Rain. Sunny is my teacher." Changing Star remained silent for a moment, studying the unexpected guest. Then a small hint of a smile appeared on her beautiful face. "Really? Well, I used to be your teacher's teacher. I guess that makes me your grand teacher." Rain opened her eyes wide. Wah! Changing Star of the Immortal Flame Clan was her what? The concept simply failed to register. The supposed grand teacher, meanwhile, walked over to the kitchen counter and poured herself some water. She drank it, then looked at Rain. After a few seconds of silence, she said, "I'll be staying here for a few days. You can call me Neff." Rain slowly nodded, not quite sure what she was just told. Was she sleeping? Was the famous lady of the Immortal Flame Clan in front of her, wearing Sunny's shirt, telling Rain to call her by her first name, a nickname even. If that bastard Sunny had not subjected Rain to stumbling into Song of the Fallen, raised by wolves and nightingale, she would have probably fainted by now. As it was, Rain was barely able to remain on her feet. Lady Changing Star Neff looked at her attentively, and then suddenly asked a strange question. "Rain, does your home have a big window and a lawn?" Rain silently nodded. "Yes." "Why?" Neff lingered for a moment, and then turned away, just wondering. Then, she looked toward the living room area and sipped her water. "Oh, by the way, do you know how to control the entertainment system of this house?" Rain nodded again. Yes, I do." Changing Star smiled with satisfaction. "Great. I was told that there is a movie about me. Can you put it on the projector?" Rain made a deep breath, obediently walked over to the projector, connected it to her communicator, and searched for the Song of Light and Darkness on the network. A few minutes later, she found herself sitting on the sofa next to Master Changing Star, the legendary heiress of immortal flame, as the somber music reverberated all around them. The movie was starting. Am I dreaming? This can't be real, can it? On the wall in front of them, the interior of a spacious and brightly lit room appeared. A handsome man with dark circles under his eyes was studying a map, while a little girl with silver hair was playing on a carpet near him. The man was speaking. "We, awakened, only raise arms to protect humanity." Sitting next to Rain, Nephis sighed and palmed her face. Chapter 783, Captive Audience. Projected onto the wall, a languid jade beauty with a slim waist and long eyelashes was traversing a labyrinth of crimson coral, her voluptuous figure barely covered by a flimsy seaweed attire. A teenage boy of about 13 years of age was scurrying along as he shouted, "Are you crazy?" Sitting on the sofa near the real Changing Star, Rain felt like sinking into the earth. As the movie went by, her cheeks slowly turned bright red. The daughter of the Immortal Flame clan, on the contrary, became increasingly more deadpan and devoid of emotion. By now, her face was so still that it seemed paralyzed. Rain awkwardly cleared her throat. Come to think of it, the actress they chose does not look like you at all. You are much prettier." Nephis shifted and briefly glanced down. Then, she said evenly, "Thank you." After a while, she added, "Why would they cast a child to play Sunny? What a strange decision. Only a complete fool could mistake him for a young boy." Rain let out a nervous laugh. Yeah, definitely." She looked away in utter embarrassment, and then forced out, "And what is up with that stupid catchphrase? That does not sound like something Sunny would say at all." Changing Star moved, suddenly becoming a little more lively. "Oh no, that actually happened. A lot." The movie, meanwhile, continued. The three sleepers braved the wilderness of the Forgotten Shore and eventually reached the Dark City. The brief moment of liveliness passed, and instead, Changing Star seemed to grow more rigid and cold with each scene. Rain felt so uncomfortable that she could not bring herself to say anything. What kind of idiot directed that stupid movie? Meanwhile, a handsome young man with broad shoulders and a noble bearing appeared on the screen. Rain glanced at Lady Nephis curiously, wondering how much of what was shown about her relationship with the heroic Han Leacaster was true, and how her apparent relationship with Sunny fit into it. Could it be that there had been an actual love triangle between them? Sadly, she failed to glimpse anything from Changing Star's stoic face. The movie progressed, slowly reaching its culmination. On the wall, the masculine face of the actor playing Sir Castor radiated courage and passion. Holding the grief-stricken jade beauty by the hand, he looked her in the eyes and said with passion, "Should I fall, do not cry for me, my lady. My life does not matter, but yours does. Immortal flame must never be extinguished. As long as it burns, humanity still has hope. The dreamers of the Dark City have hope. As long as you live, I can face 1,000 deaths with a triumphant smile." Rain shifted uncomfortably. Is it me? Or is it getting hot in here? Not a single muscle moved on Changing Star's face. She looked at the projection with a deadpan expression. The projection, however, suddenly stuttered. Rain frowned. Huh? In the next moment, She thought that she smelled smoke. Turning around, the teenage girl noticed a thin stream of it rising from inside Sunny's expensive projector. That's strange. Rain opened her mouth to say something, but before she could, the projector suddenly exploded. After the movie was suddenly and violently interrupted, Rain only stayed for long enough to help Changing Star clean up the debris of the malfunctioned projector. Then, she found an excuse, grabbed her backpack, and hurriedly left. Who knew what was going to explode next? Once the teenage girl was gone, Nephis was once again left alone in the empty house. She lingered for a bit, then went back into the guest bedroom and rummaged through Effie's closet. She had no clothes apart from the tracksuit that the academy had issued to her, which was soaked with sweat after the night she had spent with Sunny underground. There were memories, of course, but she had worn armor for the better part of the last 3 years. Putting on something mundane was strangely comforting. Leaving Sunny's shirt on, she found a pair of gym shorts to match it. Sadly, other articles of Effie's clothing did not fit her too well. She was going to have to do some shopping soon. Considering such matters again felt very strange. Eventually, Nephis found herself back in the living room with nothing to do. She simply sat in silence for a while, trying to deal with the disturbing oddity of not being in danger. Then, she shifted uncomfortably, looked around, and took out the state-of-the-art communicator the government provided to her. She stared at it for some time, then tentatively accessed the network. After a while, Neff found herself senselessly scrolling through popular clips. A few minutes later, one video caught her attention. A demonic figure in black armor and fearsome mask stood in a small clearing in the middle of a thick forest, a long blade of an odachi resting on his shoulder. The swordsman's white hair moved slightly in the wind. Something about him seemed odd. Suddenly, 12 figures appeared from behind the trees, surrounding the demonic swordsman. One of the ambushers spoke. "Sorry, mongrel, no hard feeling, right?" Nephis shook her head slightly and sighed. 12 against 1. The man in black armor, meanwhile, remained silent for a moment and then said calmly, "None whatsoever." Already knowing how the fight would end, Neff moved her finger to scroll on but then stopped. Something very unexpected was happening on the screen of her communicator. Instead of being instantly overwhelmed, the warrior dodged several attacks and dove through a stream of scorching fire, his black armor reflecting the crimson flames like the scales of an infernal monster. His gauntlet collided against the head of one of the enemies, instantly breaking the skull. White sparks slowly ignited in the depths of Neff's eyes. Interesting. She lingered, watching the brutal slaughter with a hint of excitement. After spending years fighting against overwhelming odds, Nephis couldn't help but root for the lonesome swordsman. A few seconds later, she was fully engrossed in the video. Remarkable. Chapter 784. Single Hole. The second lecture had turned out to be a challenge for Sunny. Not because he felt unprepared to teach the less experienced awakened, but because all of them were very enthused and full of questions about Changing Star's return. The whole academy was abuzz. "Master Sunless, have you met Lady Changing Star? Is it true? Did she ascend? Are you going to join the Immortal Flame Clan now? Can we join too?" Normally, that would not have been a problem. Sadly for Sunny, he could not refuse to answer any question due to his flaw, so it took some time and ingenuity to not let anything important slip while reining the students in. Eventually, he forced them to concentrate on the lecture. After the lecture was over, he had to take care of some administrative issues, as well as visit teacher Julius and assist the old man with a few tasks. Seeing that his assistant was very eager to leave, the elderly instructor did not keep Sunny long and soon let him go with a knowing smile. "Ah, youth." Sunny frowned a little as he hurried to the door. What is that supposed to mean? Throwing the confusion out of his mind, Sunny decided to not waste time and used Shadow Step to reach the train station as fast as possible. On the way home, he was deep in thought. After the night of experimenting and exploring their bond, he was very curious what else Nephis and he could do. As far as Sunny understood it, Shadow Bond made it so that their souls were strangely considered to be two parts of a single whole, at least when applied to the function of their aspects. So did that mean that he could pull Neph with him through the shadows when using Shadow Step? If he used a charm like Blood Blossom, would its effect be shared to her? If so, would the boost granted to them remain the same, or grow twice as weak? He had many questions like that, and answers to them could only be found through further experimentation. Sunny was very excited. Why wouldn't he be? He was always resentful of his weakness and of the fact that stronger awakened or powerful nightmare creatures could snuff out his life without too much trouble. Anything that could grant him more power to defend himself was a boon, and the memory of how powerful he had felt last night was still fresh in his mind. Of course, reality was not so simple. Firstly, any experiment would demand Neff to go through torturous pain. Secondly, he had not forgotten that this power came at a cost. The cost was his freedom. Nephis seemed to be reluctant to use the shadow bond to compel him to do her bidding, but he could not be completely sure of her intentions. Not until they talked openly about it. It was just that he didn't want to have that talk yet. Talking openly about anything was the last thing he usually wanted to do. Later, I'll do it later. Neff was barely out of the nightmare. Sunny himself had not been in the best of shapes after ascending for a while. It was better to give her some time to balance herself. Soon he was nearing his house. The security system automatically scanned his biometrics and unlocked the door. Opening it, Sunny walked inside and took off his shoes. Then he looked around and noticed Neff sitting on a tall stool near the kitchen counter, staring at her communicator with strange intensity. Her eyes were burning, and it seemed as if she had spent a lot of time without moving. She seemed to be so engrossed with what was happening on the screen that she did not even pay attention to his return. Clenching her fist, Neff suddenly spoke. "Come on, you can do it. She is good, but you are better." He blinked a couple of times, unaccustomed to hearing such enthusiasm in Changing Star's voice. She was usually far more reserved. And what did she mean? What was he supposed to do? Who was he better than? She must be talking to herself. But what the hell is she watching? Sunny took a few steps forward and looked over Neff's shoulder. A strange expression appeared on his face. On the screen, a ferocious swordsman in black armor was fighting against a graceful woman who wore a light metal armor and an elegant half-mask. Rose petals fell from above, carpeting a grandiose arena. A dark odachi and a slender estoc clashed against each other, filling the air with the clangor of steel. Wait, isn't that my duel against Queen Bee? That was a memorable fight. He had barely won that one. Sunny blinked a couple of times, remained silent for a few moments, and then coughed. Hey? I'm back." Nephis froze. She paused the video, hesitated, then slowly turned and looked at him with a startled expression. "Oh, hey." Sunny stared at her for a couple of seconds, then asked with a little smile, "What are you watching?" Nephis suddenly livened up and gestured at her communicator. "That I stumbled on a video of a very interesting fighter. Have you heard about that guy, Mongrel? He's incredible. I've been studying his fights for a few hours." Sunny scratched the back of his head and then said evenly, "Mongrel. Yeah, I've heard a few things about him. Incredible, you say? Do tell what is so incredibly about him in detail." Then, he suddenly frowned and sniffed the air. "What's this smell? Crap. Don't tell that the filtration system is glitching." Sunny looked around and then froze. His eye twitched. What happened to my projector?" A familiar deadpan expression appeared on Neff's face. She glanced in the direction where the expensive model of the projector had used to be, lingered for a moment, and shrugged nonchalantly. "Oh, a malfunction, I guess. How strange." Chapter 785, Solitude. As Sunny bitterly explored the damage done to his entertainment system by the strange malfunction, Nephis silently watched him from her stool. "Doesn't make sense, gone. The projector is completely gone. It was so expensive." After a while, he turned to Changing Star with a miserable expression and opened his mouth, then frowned in confusion. "Wait, is that my shirt?" Neff shifted a little and then said, her voice even, "I don't have any clothes." Sunny stared at her for a few moments, then waved a hand and looked away, forgetting what he was going to say. "Never mind. You can keep it. We can also order a delivery of anything else you need. I am an incredibly rich entrepreneur, you know." He paused, then added with a bit of embarrassment, "Well, I used to be rich anyway. These days I pretty much spend everything on research. She tilted her head a little, then suddenly said, "The girl you're tutoring visited." "What?" Pretending to be nonchalant, Sunny glanced at Nephis and answered in a neutral tone, "Oh, strange. We weren't supposed to have any lessons until a few days from now." Neph remained silent for a few moments, then looked away with a smile. "She is a bright kid. I'm glad you are teaching her." He studied her expression with a frown. "What's up with that smile?" Finally, Sunny shrugged. "Well, money is money. My lessons aren't cheap." After that, he sighed, threw the destroyed projector out of his mind, and walked into the kitchen. "Are you hungry? I can cook something up. My culinary skills have improved a lot, you know, as you should have already noticed." It was a strange thing. Back on the forgotten shore, Nephis had always been the one in charge of feeding the cohort. Now their roles seemed to have reversed in more ways than one. She deactivated her communicator and said neutrally, "I could eat. Thank you." Then, Changing Star frowned slightly and added, "Oh, but I don't have a lot of time. There is a consultation with the government psychiatrist I need to attend shortly, by remote, of course." Sunny stared at her for a while, then shook his head. "This is so weird." Deciding to prepare something that did not demand a lot of time to make, he took out a pack of ramen, some vegetables, a piece of natural meat, and a pair of eggs. "I never thought that I would hear something like that from you, of all people." "A psychiatrist, really." He started the process of cooking ramen and added, "Was it really that bad?" Changing Star sighed and looked down. After a while, she suddenly said, "No, it wasn't too bad." Her voice sounded distant and a bit strange. "In fact, out there in the dream realm, I felt—" Nephis inhaled deeply and then looked at him somberly. "Happy." Sunny almost dropped the cooking pot. Of all the answers out there, he had not expected to hear that one. Looking at Nephis with an incredulous expression, he asked, "What? Did you say happy?" She sighed and nodded. "I know that it sounds strange, and yes, traveling through that hell alone was excruciating, terrible and hard. Many times I did not think that I would survive. Other times I wanted to die. There was so much pain, so much hunger, so much thirst, so much cold, so much unbearable heat, so much silence." A wistful expression slowly settled on her face. "But it was also so simple, so liberating. All I had to do was walk, fight, kill, survive. There was no space for unnecessary thoughts. No burdens I had to carry. No complicated feelings, no responsibility. I did not have to remember where I came from and where I was headed. I did not have to be a part of anything. It was just me against the nightmare creatures and the dream realm itself." He listened silently, trying to imagine what living like that would feel like. Well, he didn't have to try too hard. Had he not experienced something similar while living alone in the ruined cathedral of the Dark City? Yes, he had not been entirely himself back then, but he was also the happiest he had ever been, perhaps. There was a bliss in giving up on everything except for the things he needed to survive. Even if the things he was giving up on were his sanity, his future, and his very humanity. Granted, his isolation had only lasted for several months instead of years, and the environment had not been as dire. What would have happened to him if he had not abandoned the cathedral to join Changing Star's ill-fated crusade? She looked down and added evenly, "I have never felt truly connected to the rest of humanity. I was always a bit of a stranger, I guess, out there in the dream realm, with only nightmare creatures surrounding me. That connection grew even more ethereal. Sometimes I even felt like everything except for that desolate purgatory had been just a fleeting dream, a strange illusion that I had imagined. The dream realm, it seemed much more real. It seemed like a place where I belonged, with other monsters like me." She sighed, then looked at him and added, "So, that's why I agreed to the offer to receive counseling. It is not because I feel fragile and on the verge of breaking apart. It's just that I'm afraid to lose what little humanity I have left. I never had a lot, to begin with." After Neff was done speaking, Sunny stared at her for some time, then shook his head. "I don't think I have ever heard Neff speak so much." Placing ramen in the boiling water, he glanced at her with a frown. Well, if you put it like that, I guess a little counseling would do you good. However, I can tell you right now and without a shadow of a doubt that you are not a nightmare creature. You're a human through and through. Believe me, I would know. A pale smile appeared on Changing Star's face. Thank you for saying that. Sunny looked at her with an amused expression and then smiled. I don't think you understand. I am not saying this because I consider you a human, or because I feel like you are a human, or because I believe that you are a human. It's just a fact. He pointed to his eye. I have special eyes, remember? From that attribute of mine, I have seen what people look like and what nightmare creatures look like inside. He peered into Neff's soul and grimaced, almost blinded by the brilliant radiance of 5 flaming incandescent suns that burned inside of it. There was no sign of the vile darkness that dwelled in the souls of the corrupted abominations. Cracking an egg on the edge of the pan, he looked at her and scoffed. You don't look anything like a nightmare creature, that's all. Chapter 786 Lifeline. Soon, 2 bowls of delicious steaming ramen were on the table in front of them. Sunny had never invited anyone to taste his ramen, but he was quite pleased with the result. His past of only eating synth paste seemed so distant that he did not even want to remember it. Both dug in and finished their portions in record time. Sunny drank the last of the fragrant broth and let out a delighted sigh. Nephis acted more reserved, but he could feel that she was very satisfied too. Putting the bowl away, Changing Star smiled slightly and looked at him. A hesitant expression appeared on her face. A few moments later, she suddenly said, Be that as it may, while I was lost and wandering the dream realm, slowly forgetting what it felt like to be human, there was one thing I clung to that reminded me that all my prior life had not been just a dream. Do you know what it was? Sunny thought for a bit, then shrugged. I don't know. A memory? Your sword? Dreamblade? She lingered for a few moments, then slowly shook her head. No, it was you. Sunny froze and stared at her with surprise. Huh? Nephis smiled slightly. Your runes. Although I could not know what was happening to you, Cassie, and the others, I could still feel connected to you through the runes. I could see that you were still out there, alive, and doing incredible things. The new memories you received told me a little about what kind of enemies you fought. The speed at which your aspect legacy progressed told me how hard you were working to sharpen your battle skill. As long as I saw the runes, I knew that I had not imagined the past, and did not feel as alone. She shifted, and then added, When I was bored, I liked to imagine what exactly happened to give you a sudden influx of fragments, what the nightmare creature that gifted you a memory looked like, how you defeated it. Things like that. Oh, and I was bored often. While my journey was often full of hardship and dread, it could also be terribly monotonous sometimes. So that was pretty much the only way I could entertain myself. Changing Star looked at him, lingered for a moment, and then said, I know it was not really something that you did consciously. Still, I wanted to say thank you. You helped me a lot, Sunny. You made it easier for me to keep going. I won't forget that. He stared at her, suddenly uncomfortable. Then he looked away in embarrassment and cleared his throat. Are you sure that you have not received counseling already? I mean, that doesn't sound like you. Very, enlightened. Anyway, you're welcome, I guess. Nephis smiled and did not respond. Sunny remained silent for a bit, and then forced himself to say, Actually, I spent a lot of time staring at your runes as well. He looked at the floor. Granted, I was not exactly going crazy from isolation like you. Well, except for a short stretch of falling into a bottomless abyss all alone, I guess. But the point is, to be honest, I am unsatisfied with the fact that you are so far ahead of me. Every time you gained a soul fragment, it urged me to try and get 2. The stronger you grew, the more I wanted to become stronger as well. A large part of those things I gained was because of you. I guess you too kept me going in a sense. He fell silent, and then glanced at Nephis with a slightly bitter expression. Of course, no matter how hard I tried, I had never managed to catch up to you. Every time I fell short, it did not feel nice at all, but it also forced me to try harder, I guess. She studied his face for a few moments, and then shook her head. It is much easier for me to gain soul fragments. You know that. Even though I am still ahead, I suspect that you have fought and slain many more nightmare creatures than I have. In fact, I know you did. Sunny smiled. Who cares? It's not a competition where you get rewarded for the effort. Only the result matters. In the end, a person is either strong or they are weak. The stronger ones will always trample those who are weaker. Isn't that how the world works? Nephis looked down, then slowly shook her head. You are wrong. I think results matter. Yes, but it's not like how you got there doesn't. Every victory you achieve teaches you a lesson. Every defeat you suffer teaches you even more. I guess it all depends on what you call strength. Sunny grimaced. Well, let me ask you a question. Can you say that I am stronger than you? Changing Star stared at him with an even expression. Several seconds passed by, but she remained silent. A dark grin appeared on Sunny's face. He sighed, and then collected the empty bowls to clean them. Effie doesn't seem to think that I am. According to her, I lack conviction. I don't even really know what conviction is, and where does one find it? But even I can't honestly say that I am stronger than you. That should tell you something considering, my clear conscience. Nephis lingered for a few moments, and then suddenly said in calm tone, You are stronger than you think you are. Sunny put the bowls into the sink and turned on the water, standing with his back to her. He stayed quiet for a while. After some time, he started to wash the dishes and said, Your counseling session is about to start. You should hurry. She looked at his back for a few moments, then silently stood up and went away. Sunny was left alone in the kitchen. He finished washing the bowls, put them on the drying rack, and wiped his hands with a towel. Then, he glanced in the direction of the guest room, shook his head, and scoffed. Ah, who cares? Apparently I am incredible. Chapter 787 Training Session. A week later, two people sat across from each other on the cold floor of the underground dojo, their eyes closed. With their legs crossed and their hands resting on their laps, it seemed as though they were meditating. Of course they weren't. While Sunny was calm and relaxed, Nephis was the opposite. There was a furious torrent of soul energy flowing through her body, making it hard for her to remain still. Invisible to anyone except for her partner, radiant streams of ethereal essence rushed through her veins like rivers of flame. Her breathing was uneven, and there were beads of sweat on her face. Sunny observed Changing Star through his shadows. After a while, he said, You are doing much better. While crude, your control is already stable. However, there is no precision to it. A master has to be intricate in how they apply and expend their essence. That is what truly separates us from the awakened. While the soul of an ascended is more potent, the gap is not too large. It is our ability to make better use of this potential that really separates us from the rest of them. Neph was doing well. In fact, her rapid progress in learning how to control her essence was nothing short of exceptional. However, she was facing substantial obstacles in her training. Not only was Changing Star completely new to that aspect of her power, she also simply had too much soul essence. Compared to normal master, she had at least 5 times as much of it. If most ascended contained a tranquil current of essence within their bodies, Nephis contained a furious sea. Her soul essence was also different from anything Sunny had ever faced. It was much more potent, fiery, and vibrant, probably because of the fire attribute she had inherited from her mother. What it effectively meant was that Neph would have to put much more effort into learning to control her essence. However, once she did climb over that steep obstacle, the result was going to be simply terrifying. Showing her the way put Sunny's own experiences in perspective, gifting him a few new insights of his own. Just as it had been with Rain, the role of a mentor allowed him to learn a lot himself. Teaching was truly the best way to learn. Now Sunny felt that his own essence control was far more precise and nuanced than that of most, even without the help of Soul Serpent. Of course, he had no chance to test it in actual combat yet. He was also growing more and more sour about the fact that both Blood Weave and Bone Weave were purely corporeal in nature. Although Shadow Essence was unique, it did not receive any augmentation from his attributes. In fact, the only time its strange nature played a role had been during his encounter with the vile thieving bird Spawn. Even though that single instance had saved his life, Sunny really wished for more. Maybe I am not utilizing its full potential. If there was a way to do so, however, he had no idea how. Maybe if Weaver's lineage had not devoured the shadow gods, Sunny would have been in a different situation as it stood, though. I wonder if there is a soul weave. Nephis sighed and opened her eyes. The turbulent flow of soul essence in her body settled, returning to a calmer cycle. She rested for a moment and then rose to her feet. Sunny did the same, commanding the four shadows to wrap themselves around his body. Are you ready? She nodded and then exploded in motion, attacking him with her fists. Empowered by the shadows, Sunny easily dodged, deflected, and blocked the torrent of devastating punches and kicks. This was the second part of their training. Nephis not only had to learn how to control soul essence, but also how to use it in battle. She had to retrain herself from the ground up to account for all the new possibilities that the ascension granted her. This was not an easy task, considering that the difference went much deeper than simple physical ability and explosive might. At their high level, combat became much more tactical. Soul essence was a precious resource that could achieve a lot, but was also easily wasted. A master had to be strategic in how they unleashed their powers. Their physical performance, aspect, and memories could all benefit from vast amounts of essence. However, they could also quickly deplete it. The same statement held true for awakened, but to a much lesser degree, since masters had much greater powers at their disposal and thus could exert much greater volumes of soul essence. It was a constant and complicated dance that required a lot of skill, foresight, and cunning to be performed to the best result. Sunny himself still had a lot to learn. Serving as a bona fide punching bag for Nephis was not the most efficient way of learning, but it had its own merits. By dedicating himself to nothing but withstanding a constant barrage of attacks and rationing his essence in the most efficient way, Sunny was teaching himself how to prepare for long battles of attrition. At least she had mastered essence control enough to not ruin the dojo. For a while, the underground chamber was filled with nothing but the sounds of heavy breathing and flesh hitting flesh. Both fighters were exerting themselves to the utmost degree. Sunny had it easier since he was defending, but receiving so many crushing blows in a row was still not for the weak of heart. Each of Neff's essence-empowered strikes could have punched through an armored vehicle, after all. If not for the fact that she was not using her flames to augment herself, Sunny would have been suffering from internal bleeding by now. Having nearly indestructible bones was a big advantage, but it did not make him invincible. Their furious clash lasted until Nephis exhausted most of her essence. Determined to launch one last attack, she stepped closer. Her slender leg whipped forward, threatening to crush Sunny's ribcage. He swiftly turned and caught it in the air, then gently placed it on the ground. That's enough for today. Since this had been their routine for the entirety of the last week, neither said another word. Both fell to the floor, spent and utterly exhausted. Their breathing was hoarse, and their clothes were soaked with sweat. Damn, I need a shower. However, the idea of standing up seemed too cruel right now. Sunny turned his head to glance at Nephis and judged that she was in an even more pitiful state. So they simply remained on the floor for a few minutes, laying side by side and trying to catch their breath. After a while, Sunny's communicator suddenly made a sound. Of course, it was not on his person. A clash of such intensity would have quickly destroyed the expensive device, so Sunny had left it on the lid of the Dreamscape pod. Now, he faced the necessity to walk all the way to the alcove to retrieve it. Instead, Sunny commanded the happy shadow to glide there, turn tangible, pick up the communicator, and bring it back. The fool was utterly delighted to oblige anyway. As the shadow gingerly crossed the underground dojo and presented the communicator to Sunny, he glanced at the screen and then sighed. Time to go, Neff. Cassie is on her way. Chapter 788, Cordial Invitation. Sunny took a quick shower and went downstairs. By the time he came down, Nephis was just exiting the guest room. She changed from the gym shorts and a tank top that she had been wearing for their practice session and put on some of the clothes they had ordered for her a few days back. Her silver hair was wet, glistening in the rays of sunshine that poured through the windows. Without having to say anything, Sunny went to the kitchen, opened a drawer, and took out a can of grounded coffee. Then he stretched his arm back. By then, Nephis had already filled a pot with water and placed it into his hand. Soon the pleasant aroma spread through the house. By the time the coffee was ready, a PTV was in the process of parking nearby. Sonny dumped 2 spoons of sugar into his cup, left the one intended for Neff without any, and added cream to the third. Changing Star, meanwhile, was opening the door for Cassie. Soon, all 3 were seated around the table, enjoying their respective beverages. After a while, Sonny glanced at the blind girl and asked, "Well, what's the news?" She lingered for a bit, then pushed her cup away and produced 2 flat white squares. Sonny stared at them for a bit, confused. Then he blinked a couple of times. "Is that an envelope?" Indeed, that was what the white squares were. They seemed to be made out of paper, and each had a round piece of red wax attached to it. Sonny had only seen an actual paper envelope used in period dramas, so he was justifiably surprised to encounter one in real life. Taking one of the envelopes, he curiously studied it from different sides. How quaint. There was an image of a sword piercing an anvil etched into the red wax, so at least he did not have to wonder where the strange things had come from. Legacies. Amused, he furtively glanced at Nephis to learn what one was supposed to do with a paper envelope, and then repeated her actions. Soon, a different piece of paper appeared in his hands. "Master Sunless, you are cordially invited. What is this?" Even more confused than before, he turned to Cassie and raised an eyebrow. She was supposed to bring them an update on the situation with the government and Clan Valor, not some weird messages. The blind girl smiled slightly. "Basically, this is a gesture of goodwill." She paused for a moment and then added in a bright tone, "It is an invitation. Clan Valor is holding an annual ball in about a month. We are all invited to attend, which is usually considered a great honor. Not every master receives the privilege to brush sides with the most powerful representatives of the great clans and actual saints." Sonny blinked a couple of times. Is holding balls some weird legacy ceremony? Wait, what kinds of ball are we talking about? Something like a football? Why do people hold it annually? And more importantly, why do we have to attend this ball-holding ritual? Nephis silently covered her face with a hand and said, a hint of exasperation finding its way into her voice, "Sonny, a ball is a social gathering, usually accompanied by a dance. It is not a literal ball." He stared at her for a moment, then glanced at the piece of paper in his hand and coughed. "Oh, that makes more sense, I guess." Cassie listened to them speak with a strange expression, then tilted her head a little and said, "Of course, in our case, this invitation holds special meaning. It is a sign that Clan Valor is willing to be patient and wait for Nephis to recover. It is also the indication that the final negotiation is going to take place during the ball, 1 month from now. This gives us time to prepare." This was a good piece of news, all things considered. Basically, it meant that now that the initial week was over, Changing Star had more time to get ready to face the representatives of Clan Valor. It also meant that the Great Clan was not going to do anything before that, giving her freedom to recuperate in peace. It was more or less an armistice. A bright smile appeared on Cassie's delicate face. But there is more. To show their sincerity, Clan Valor released the firekeepers they were holding hostage. Both are already back and resting in the immortal flame manor. This means that they are serious about building a good relationship with us, I think." Sonny let out a sigh. He was not really attached to the firekeepers. Still, they had gone through the civil war in the Bright Castle and the siege of the Crimson Spire together. The fools also treated him as one of their own for some reason. He had felt a bit guilty knowing that some of them were suffering because of the terrible mess in the Night Temple. Effie, Kai, and Aiko were going to be very happy to hear the news too. However, it was not like Clan Valor to let go of leverage. Sonny glanced at Cassie and frowned. What are they scheming? The blind girl hesitated for a few moments, then shrugged. I am not entirely sure. However, I do have a suspicion. This sudden change must indicate that something important happened to shift the balance of power even more in favor of Clan Song. That is why Valor is willing to make concessions to ensure that Immortal Flame becomes their ally. Sonny suddenly felt a strong sense of unease. What could have happened to change the power dynamic between the two great clans so much? He took a sip of his coffee and then asked, "Well, so what now?" Cassie smiled. "Now? Now we are free to do anything we want for a month. The government is going to insist that Nephis makes at least one public appearance, but they won't be too forceful in their demands. So we can do whatever." She turned to Changing Star and said, her voice full of warmth, "Neph, how do you feel about finally coming home? We can go to the manor right now, if you're ready." Chapter 789, Only Forward. Nephis looked in the window and remained silent for a while. Her face was distant and still. After a while, she lightly shook her head. "No, not yet." Cassie seemed to be surprised by that answer. "No? But why?" Changing Star sighed. "The Fire Keepers. That is what people call the awakened who follow you, right? They all look up to me, do they not?" The blind girl silently nodded. "Of course, they have been waiting for your return ever since escaping the Forgotten Shore, even though the Dreamer Army was an alliance of convenience. The bonds that were forged between its members are real. Their bond to you is real too." Sonny sipped his coffee with a strange expression. Neph, meanwhile, lingered for a moment, and then said, "But they want more than just to welcome me back. They expect me to lead them, like I did on the Forgotten Shore. Am I correct?" Cassie nodded once again. Neph looked away. "How can I lead them when I don't know where I'm going? I need more time to figure things out before I face them." The blind girl remained silent for a while, then sighed. I understand, I think." Sonny, meanwhile, did not understand. Sure. On the surface, what Nephis said made perfect sense. She was not sure of what she was going to do, so she could not offer the remnants of the Dreamer Army guidance. She could not become their general again until she decided on the direction her soldiers had to follow. However, Sonny harbored doubts about the sincerity of this indecision. Nephis had never been one to allow her hesitation to slow her down. More than that, she had spent 2 whole years alone in the dream realm. If he knew anything about her, he knew that she must have dedicated a considerable amount of that time to obsessively making plans of how to destroy her enemies once she returned. Of course, there was a lot of new information that became available to Neph after she came back. That had to change her approach a little, but should not have affected the core of it. So why was she hesitating? What was she struggling with? Sonny did not know, and was not sure that he wanted to know yet. In any case, he was going to learn sooner or later. There was something else that bothered him, though. He glanced at Nephis and Cassie, and then said, his voice grumpy, "Aren't you two forgetting something? This is still my home. We only agreed that Nephis would stay here for a week. Shouldn't you at least ask me before deciding to leave her here for a while longer?" He was not going to let Changing Star pull off an Effie that easily. Neph turned and looked at him with an unreadable expression. After a few moments of silence, she asked, "Sonny, do you mind if I stay for a couple more weeks?" He coughed and then glanced away in embarrassment. "Of course, sure, no problem. Glad to have you, and all that." See, was that so hard? Cassie remained for a bit longer to get Nephis up to speed about the state of the Fire Keepers and the renovations they were making to the Immortal Flame Manor, and then left. Running a prominent awakened organization was not an easy task, so she had a lot on her plate. Sonny and Neph were left alone again. He hesitated for a few moments, and then asked, "Do you really not want to go home? I mean, I never really had one, more or less, before buying this house. But if I did, I imagine I would have missed it a lot." Nephis glanced at him, then slowly shook her head. "That place is not really my home. We were moving a lot while I was growing up. Sometimes because our financial situation changed, sometimes due to security issues. That manor is just the last in a long series of temporary shelters." She remained silent for a few moments, then added, "I guess it was the people who surrounded me that created the feeling of home. But they are all gone now, one way or the other. So there's nothing for me to return to." Sonny sighed, remembering the conversation he once had with Noctis. "I don't really understand what the Immortal Flame Clan is, to be honest, and who those people were. You once said that you were raised by your grandmother?" Changing Star nodded. "The Immortal Flame is just me now. At its height, it was one of the most influential legacy clans. You could have called it a great clan even, although that distinction was not established yet back then. Apart from the immediate family, the clan also encompassed hundreds of other people. professionals to manage our properties, craftsmen, mundane soldiers, awakened retainers, their dependents. A legacy clan is more than just a few powerful warriors. It is a large, self-sufficient institution, a tribe even. She grew silent, and then said, "Of course, our fortunes turned after Immortal Flame himself died and my mother became hollow. Then my father was gone too. Only my grandmother remained to take care of me. She was not an awakened, however. Don't think that she was weak because of it. On the contrary, although my grandmother was a mundane human, she was also the strongest person I've ever known." Nephis looked away, a hint of emotion appearing on her face. She was a member of the first generation. She was born during the darkest times of humanity, survived the bloody descent of the spell and the final convulsions of the old world order, then participated in the establishment of the new one. She was strong. She was also wise and kind. I couldn't wish for a better guardian. She looked down. However, she was not enough to keep the Immortal Flame clan from falling, especially not when we found ourselves in the crosshairs of my father's former companions. Slowly but surely, we lost our assets and our standing. Some of the people in our employ left of their own free will, others were forced to abandon us because of adversity. Many of those who remained died, trying to protect me. The most loyal ones still persisted. There were several awakened among them, and even a master. My mentor. Nephis sighed, but in the end he was gone too. By the time I turned 16, all that remained were a few mundane servants who had been with us for so long that they had nowhere else to go. After my grandmother passed away, and I felt the call of the nightmare spell, I paid them a generous stipend from what little funds the clan had left and let them go. You know the rest. Changing Star remained silent for a while, and then added, "I remember walking through the manor before leaving it to comply with the third directive and surrender myself to the police. It was so strange, seeing it completely empty. My grandmother was gone. My mother was in the care facility. The servants had left. It was just me, alone." She looked away. Suddenly, a pale smile appeared on her face. Nothing held me back. So I wasn't sad to leave at all. There was only one direction left for me forward. Sonny looked at her silently, a somber expression hidden in the depths of his eyes. Only forward. That was true for the both of them still. However, was it worth it to not be held back by anything, if in return you had nothing to hold dear? Turning away, he sighed. Life was not that simple anymore. Chapter 790 Outing. Despite the fact that Nephis had decided to stay with Sunny for a couple more weeks, or rather, that he had allowed her stay, their routine somewhat changed. Because of the armistice with Clan Valor, she did not have to stay inside all the time anymore. So, while the two of them still continued having exhausting practice sessions every day, the intensity of the training diminished. On the first day after receiving the invitation to the ball, Nephis had left to visit her mother. Soon after that, she made a strange request. The counselor assigned to Neph by the government had suggested that she should not isolate herself from mundane humans and instead seek out opportunities to participate in collective activities people usually enjoyed. So she asked Sunny to help her figure out what it was that people did with their free time. Sunny was glad to help. The problem was, he had no idea himself. His life experience was richer than hers, but the knowledge of how people lived their lives in the outskirts did not exactly apply to their situation. After becoming a citizen and moving to a better part of the city, Sunny had spent all his time doing more productive things than relaxing. Who had time to relax? There were so many things he needed to achieve. As the result, they had to turn to other members of the cohort for advice. When they did, Effie enthusiastically volunteered to arrange an outing. Although Sunny had a bad premonition about her proposal, he found no polite reason to refuse the giddy huntress. So, a few days later, he found himself doing something that he had never thought he would ever do. Sunny was getting ready to go to a dance club. What am I even doing? This is so stupid. Standing in front of the mirror, he somberly looked at the pale young man that stared back at him. The young man was dressed in stylishly understated clothes that mixed black with different shades of dark gray. He was undeniably attractive, although not exactly masculine in appearance. The attractive young man, of course, was him. Or his reflection, rather. Sunny studied it and frowned. Whatever. It's just a nightclub. I have fought saints and survived. I have conquered the Red Colosseum. I have faced a daemon. How scary can a bunch of drunk mundanes be? Shaking his head, he let out a heavy sigh and went down to the living room. As he sat and waited with a dark expression on his face, an expensive PTV arrived and parked near the house. At that moment, Effie and Neff emerged from one of the smaller bedrooms on the second floor and started descending the stairs. Finally, what took you so? He turned and froze, unable to finish his thought. Standing on the polished steps, Neff looked different. Although she was famous across the world, most people only knew her by name. Very few had actually seen the renowned changing star of the Immortal Flame clan, mostly because she had yet to appear in public after her return from the Dream Realm. However, it was still prudent to mask some of her more recognizable features to avoid being mobbed by an excited crowd. For that reason, Sunny had lent her the autumn leaf. Using the cosmetic memory, Nephis changed the color of her distinct silver hair. Now her hair was black and lustrous, falling to the middle of her back like a waterfall of finest silk. Contrasted against it, her calm gray eyes seemed even more striking. Her ivory skin seemed to glow despite the fact that she was not channeling the radiant white flames. What was more, Effie had been the one who chose and bought the clothes for the two of them to wear today. As the result, Nephis was wearing a vibrant red dress that barely reached the middle of her thigh and left her shoulders bare. She looked stunning. Sunny gulped, then forced himself to look away. A few moments later, he finally was able to say something. Never thought I'd see you in a dress one day. Nephis glanced at herself, then shrugged with indifference. I like it. The style does not diminish my range of motion. I can move freely if something happens. Sunny hesitated and then glanced at Effie, who was wearing less flashy clothes, with suspicion. How come you get to wear pants? Effie grinned. Why else? That's because I'm not a princess, doofus. She giggled, and then did a spin. What, don't you think that my ensemble is flattering? It was, maybe even too much so. Not knowing where to put his eyes, Sunny gritted his teeth and forced himself to stare at the wall. This is going to be a long night. He cleared his throat and then said, Yeah, you look nice too. Anyway, we should go. Our ride is already here. Effie giggled again, patted him on the shoulder, and headed for the door. Sunny and Nephis followed. Soon they entered the PTV and greeted the others. After seeing Kai, Sunny's mood improved a bit. At least the former idol seemed to be in his element. Cassie, on the other hand, seemed uneasy. Well, no wonder. A club filled with thundering music was not the best environment for a beautiful blind girl to be in. Of course, anyone who got the wrong idea was bound to learn that they made a giant mistake by approaching her with ill intent. Kai smiled at him from the driver's seat. Sunny, you look great. Then he turned to Nephis and Effie and smiled even wider, almost blinding them with his dazzling grin. But not as great as the ladies do, of course. Sunny rolled his eyes. Just drive. All right. Let's get this finished with as soon as possible. Kai winked at him, then looked at the road and sent the PTV forward. Oof. Relax, Sunny. It's just a dance club. What's the worst that could happen? Sunny and the gloomy shadow simultaneously shuddered. Are you kidding me? Did you have to say that out loud? Chapter 791, Human Rituals. Standing at the edge of the VIP area that loomed above the dance floor of a popular nightclub, Sunny and Nephis looked down at the undulating mass of human bodies below them with strange expressions. The music thundered and reverberated from all sides, making the whole space vibrate. The darkness was filled with flashes of light and glowing figures of elaborate moving projections. People were having the time of their lives. The club Effie had brought them to was an exclusive and luxurious establishment that only the members of the elite classes of human society could visit. The amount of credits being spent every minute on exotic alcoholic beverages and legal stimulants was nothing short of astronomical. The value of designer clothes, cutting-edge tech accessories, and precious jewelry present in the dance hall was almost revolting. The bestial excitement permeating the air was almost palpable. Staring at the mass of dancing humans in bewilderment, Sunny shook his head. What a strange ritual. Nephis turned her head slightly and raised an eyebrow. I know, right? The members of the cohort were occupying a large part of the VIP lounge intended for the most distinguished patrons of the club. Even among the mass of elites, their status was a cut above the rest. Kai and Cassie were enjoying something called champagne at the table, while the other three moved to the edge to take a look at the main hall of the club. Changing Star peered at the dancing crowd and frowned. Their behavior doesn't make any sense. Sunny nodded in solidarity. Indeed. After a while, he added, they're not even dancing. They're just rhythmically gyrating their bodies. It also appears that the proximity at which one is allowed to gyrate his or her body to other participants is representative of their desirability. Anyway, they all look incredibly stupid. Nephis tilted her head a little. It is not that simple, I think. This strange dynamic actually seems to be very nuanced. Just look at the women. They seem to be using their looks, physical coordination, and agility in order to attract the men. However, once men are attracted, the women act as if they are disinterested. Most of the time they truly are, other times it is just a signal for the men to try harder. She grew silent, and then added with slight confusion, the most startling part is that all this information, including the complicated evaluations based on obscure parameters and much more, is communicated absolutely non-verbally, and in a way that both men and women somehow seem to understand while chaotically jerking their bodies. It is like they all developed telepathic abilities. Sunny scowled. Anyway, these gyrations are clearly meant to illustrate one's high value as a romantic partner. And that is what this dance is, a venue for the dancers to seek out physically desirable partners. However, everyone acts as if it's not. In fact, most of these people are pretending that the exact opposite is true. He rubbed his chin, as if showing interest is in itself an admission of inadequacy and undesirability. Those who do manage to find partners do it through a series of obscure hints and silent signals. This is so inefficient. Why can't people just honestly state their goals and desires? They are all pursuing the same result anyway. Changing Star nodded thoughtfully. Effie, who was leaning on the railing near them, stared at the two of them with a perplexed expression. Then, the huntress slowly shook her head. You are both idiots, you know that? Sunny and Nephis looked at her with surprise, their movement almost simultaneous. What? Why? Is this analysis wrong? Effie let out an exasperated sigh. They are just having fun, gods. Don't you know what fun is? Believe it or not, it's just pleasurable to let loose and move your body to loud music sometimes. Actually, you should try it. A very similar expression of subdued revulsion appeared on both of their faces. No, thank you. I'd rather not. The huntress rolled her eyes. As for that stuff about seeking partners, what's wrong with that? Other things can be pleasurable too, you know? Both Sunny and Nephis blinked. How frivolous. Of course I do. Don't I know it well? Effie groaned and grabbed her head. Hopeless, both of them. After a few moments, she sighed, then looked at Nephis and asked, well, anyway, this is a perfect example of what humans like to do. Is it working? Do you feel better connected to humanity? Changing Star hesitated, then looked back at the mass of dancing people and remained silent for a while. Then she said, it is strange to see so many people acting so carelessly. To be honest, all I can think about. Her face turned somber. Nephis lingered for a moment as she studied the crowd with a dark expression, is how easy it would be to kill them all. They are just so unaware and unprepared. After long years of living in a state of constant pain and struggle, desperately trying to survive and fighting harrowing enemies, almost every day, it must have been hard for her to come to terms with this strange, peaceful reality. Neph might have returned to the waking world, but her mentality was slow to adjust. It was still in the dreadful grasp of the dream realm. Mentally, Changing Star was still living in a nightmare. Effie looked at her with a dubious frown. You would be surprised. This is an expensive club, so a lot of these people are awakened. In fact, I'd say that places like these have a higher concentration of awakened than pretty much anywhere else in the city, except for the academy. This club is better suited to resist a sudden gate manifestation than the headquarters of most legacy clans. Neff glanced at her with surprise. Really? The huntress grinned. Of course. Not all awakened are obsessed with fighting like the two of you. They treat the dream realm as their job, not their whole existence. While they sleep, they perform their duties, man the walls, fight the attacking nightmare creatures, maintain their citadels, and so on. When they wake up, they go about their actual lives. Chapter 792, Blind Spot. Effie smiled, then gestured at the dancing crowd and added, after they return from the dream realm, most awakened spend at least a part of their day training to raise their usefulness to the Citadel and increase their chances of survival. Some have important jobs to perform in the waking world as well. Our infrastructure runs on spell tech after all. She shook her head. But other than that, there's plenty of time to live and have fun. It doesn't have to be all work, without stop. Some might even say that not having any other interests is detrimental. The huntress looked at them and shrugged. I mean, how can you be motivated to fight for this world if you never experience all the nice things that it has to offer? Maybe that is why your counselor told you to participate in mundane human activities. Neph, awakened and especially masters like us, need to anchor ourselves to humanity somehow. But there's no gateways here. Sonny took a sniff of the strange sparkling liquid in his glass, then carefully tasted it. This champagne, or whatever it was called, was way too expensive for him to pass the chance of getting his money's worth out of it. Well, he wasn't paying today, but still, it was a matter of principle. Of course, Sonny had sworn off alcohol. But with him being a master now, there was no way for him to get drunk unless he wanted to. Not because of mundane drinks like this one, anyway. Unless he consciously willed otherwise, his body was going to treat alcohol as a weak poison and resist it. Tastes sweet, but also bitter. Very refreshing, though. How strange. Effie's words made him thoughtful. She was not entirely wrong. Sonny himself felt a bit ambivalent about the waking world, which had not been kind to him in the past. He only liked it better than the dream realm because it was safer and had nice things, like delicious food, comfortable furniture, and network dramas. Also, Rain was here. But what if an awakened was indifferent to all those things? Would they even feel compelled to do anything to protect the waking world? What was going to stop them from abandoning the mundane completely after they became a master or a saint? Or a sovereign? Nephis, meanwhile, continued to study the dance hall. After a while, she said, "There might be many awakened here, but how prepared are they to fight against a flood of nightmare creatures? It takes a lot of courage to face an opening gate. Out of those who are courageous, how many are competent enough to make a difference? Not everyone is like Mongrel. Very few can stand their ground and fight." Effie gave her a strange look. Huh? Have you been watching a lot of videos on the network, Princess? You're quoting Mongrel now? Changing Star shrugged. I just find him admirable. The huntress suddenly grinned and said in a conspiratorial tone, Neph, do you maybe have a crush on Lord Mongrel? Sonny almost spat out his champagne. He turned slightly and threw a murderous glance at Effie. Nephis, however, remained nonchalant. She showed no reaction and simply said, I just appreciate his skill and his integrity. At first, I was merely attracted by how beautiful his swordsmanship is, flowing, unpredictable, supremely adaptable. I watched a few of his duels, as well as his performances in the Dream Tournament. His dedication, versatility, and domineering attitude left a deep impression on me. Changing Star shook her head. But those were just games. It was only when I stumbled on a clip of Mongrel, single-handedly stalling several waves of nightmare creatures in front of a gate that I truly grew to appreciate his character. In my opinion, he is what a true awakened should strive to be. Someone who is not resigned to bowing down to the spell and is determined to resist it instead. His will, mastery of combat, and wisdom are commendable. It warms my heart to know that there are warriors like him out there. Sonny gripped his glass and forced out an awkward smile. Hey, let's not go overboard about that Mongrel guy, shall we? He's not that great. I mean, he was not really alone at that gate. There were other awakened helping him. As for all that wisdom stuff, I am willing to bet that he did not mean any of the crap he said. Nephis looked at him with surprise. I disagree. I think that Mongrel deserves all the praise. He is truly remarkable. Effie, meanwhile, was looking at them with a grin. Sonny suddenly got a bad feeling. Before he could say something, however, The huntress leaned forward and whispered into Neff's ear. You do know that Sonny is mongrel, right? Sonny choked on his champagne. The exquisite glass cracked slightly in his hand. Nephis froze. Her face remained still as ever. However, despite the dim lighting of the nightclub, he could swear there was a hint of pink, slowly appearing on her cheeks. Was she blushing? Damned Effie, I'll kill her. Changing Star remained silent for a while, then said in her usual even tone, Of course, I definitely knew that. She straightened her back, and then added, I was just commenting on his perceived accomplishments. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to visit the restroom. She glanced at Sonny and Effie with a deadpan expression, then turned around and walked away. Her pace was calm and steady, not rushed at all. Effie waited for a few moments, then threw her head back and exploded in laughter. Oh gods, doesn't make any sense. So inefficient. I can't with these two. Sonny glared at her with murder in his eyes. He remained silent for a few moments, then said softly, Hey, Effie. She looked at him with a wide grin. What, doofus? He sighed, then rotated his shoulders a few times. Do you have a will? The huntress blinked a couple of times. Sure. I made one before the second nightmare. Why? Sonny looked at her and smiled politely. Oh, no reason. No reason at all. Chapter 793, Memories of the Future. Effie wisely chose that moment to disappear and join the dancing crowd below. Sonny ground his teeth for a few moments, then shook his head and walked to the table, landing on a luxurious lounge chair with a sigh. Kai briefly glanced at him and smiled. Where are Effie and Lady Nephis? Sonny stared at him for a few moments, then looked away. Effie went to dance. Neff is in the bathroom. Also, will you cut it out with the lady stuff? The two of you spent months traversing the Forgotten Shore together back when we were returning from the Hollow Mountains. She is also younger than you. That is more than enough to drop the formalities, don't you think? The archer coughed. Oh, well, I'll try. He didn't sound very convincing, forcing Sonny to roll his eyes. Anyway, what do we have here? At some point, a waiter had entered the lounge and placed a tray of various foods on the table. While trying very hard not to throw reverent looks at the distinguished guests, knowing that there would be no chance for him to taste anything once Effie returned, Sonny used the opportunity to try a few. As he chewed on a piece of cheese that had been dipped into a sweet, viscous amber liquid, Sonny smiled in delight and asked, Wow. What's that sugary syrup? Cassie turned to him, then smelled the air. I think it's honey. Sonny blinked a couple of times. The word was familiar, but he usually heard it used as a term of endearment. Who knew that it had actually come from something this delicious? What is honey, though? The blind girl tilted her head a little, then said with a bit of surprise in her voice, Well, it is a sort of liquid that special insects produce by ingesting and regurgitating floral nectar, I guess. Sonny froze, grew a little pale, and slowly pushed the cheese plate away from himself. I see. Good to know. With that, he gulped a mouthful of champagne and tried to discreetly rinse his mouth. Sonny was never picky about his food. He had even sustained himself on raw, rotting mimic meat for an entire month once. But even he had his limits. Damned rich people. What are they going to come up with next? Soon, Nephis returned. She was acting as if nothing had happened, and her face was perfectly composed. However, there was a hint of confusion in her eyes. As she sat down, Kai hesitated for a moment, and then said, You seem concerned. Did anything happen? Nephis? Changing Star paid no attention to the lack of lady and simply shook her head. Nothing. I just overheard a bit of a strange conversation on my way back. Apparently there is a little snack here in the VIP lounge that those women would want to taste. Odd. Why wouldn't they just order it themselves? Well, maybe it is not on the common menu. Sonny glanced at the small bowl of honey with disgust and sneered. If they want it, they can have it. I have no objections. They are free to gobble it up, as far as I'm concerned. Ignoring a strange glance from Kai, Sonny took a sip of champagne and relaxed a little. That was the point of today's outing anyway. After days of serving as a punching bag for an untrained master, he deserved some rest. Soon enough, Effie returned. The huntress was practically beaming with delight. She quickly destroyed most of their food, poured herself a drink, and grinned. "This is fun. We should go out more often." Sunny and Nephis looked at her in horror, while Kai nodded. "Indeed, it's just a shame that they don't have live music." Effie, meanwhile, looked around with a bit of curious expression. "This is strange, though. I never imagined living like this. I mean, my goal was always to become a master. But now that I did, everything seems a little surreal." The archer smiled wistfully. "Yes, life is full of surprises, isn't it? Before the Forgotten Shore, I had a clear picture of what my future would look like. Then, for years, I tried not to think about the future at all. And now that I reached that future, it's not like what I thought it would be. Not even a little bit." Cassie let out a small sigh. "Me too. When I look back on my younger self and think about what she expected from the future, I can't believe how naive and short-sighted she was. She feels like a stranger." A few gazes fell on Sunny. He raised his eyebrow and then said, "What? This is exactly how I imagined my life would go, actually. After I returned from the first nightmare, I thought that I would soon be a full citizen, super rich, and have unlimited access to tasty food, so I don't know what you're talking about. For me, everything went according to plan." Effie rolled her eyes and then glanced at Nephis. "What about you, Princess?" Changing Star lingered for a moment, then shrugged. "I am exactly where I expected to be, too. Of course, the details are different, but the result is the same. Legacies don't really have a choice in these matters." Sunny suddenly became curious. "I heard that all children of legacy clans are inevitably infected by the nightmare spell. There is just no chance for them to remain mundane. Is this true? If so, why? What is so special about your kind?" Nephis took a sip of champagne, thought for a moment, and then said calmly, "There is nothing special about legacies. As far as one's chances of becoming infected go, we are not inherently predisposed to awaken, unlike what many people believe. There are just certain measures that a clan can undertake to make sure that its heirs do." Sunny blinked a couple of times. "Like what?" Neff looked at him evenly. "It is simple, really. The parents of a legacy child just have to implore for assistance from a saint. That is why lesser clans always seek to ally themselves with more powerful ones. The child is brought to the dream realm and then returned to the clan. This way, the seed is already planted in their soul. Once they come of age, it is inevitable for the seed to bloom and bring them to the first nightmare." Sunny frowned, feeling something strange about her phrasing. "Seed? As in the seed of nightmare?" Changing Star calmly nodded. "Of course, the first nightmare is not different from all the rest. It is also born from a seed. It is just that this seed does not grow in the dream realm. Instead, it grows in a human soul. Have you never thought why there are no gates of the first category? Well, there are, of course. Every aspirant that fails their first nightmare becomes a miniature gate, allowing a single nightmare creature to enter the waking world. That is why their corpses turn into monsters." Chapter 794, Adulthood. The sudden revelation brought the mood down for a few minutes. Sunny silently drank his champagne, thinking about what Neff had just said. It made a lot of sense, in a dark and disturbing way. It also shed some light on how the spell chose its victims. He doubted that a seed of nightmare, no matter how small, could bloom in just any soul. It probably required fertile soil to take root, of course. In this ravaged world, there were plenty of broken and traumatized people whose souls could nurture a nightmare seed. It had been even more so 50 years ago, when the spell first appeared. Had the collective anguish and torment of those lucky few who had survived the dark times summoned it from whatever hell the spell existed in, ushering the rise of the first generation of the awakened and everything that followed? He did not know, and doubted that he would find out any time soon, if ever. Nevertheless, there was another interesting hint in what Nephis had explained to them. If legacies wanted their children to inherit the mantle, and only saints could ensure that the poor kids would be doomed to either awaken or die, then saints held even more power among the legacy clans than he had thought. And who were the first saints of humanity? Asterion, Key Song, Anvil of Veil and Broken Sword. They were the first, and at some point the only people who all legacy clans had to befriend if they wanted to ensure that their bloodlines continued walking on the path of ascension. Was that, perhaps, the initial reason that had elevated the great clans above all the rest? Interesting. He was not in the mood to ponder the origins of power that the sovereigns held. However, thinking about the great clans made him feel sour. Since today was Sunny's day off, he chased the weary thoughts away and tried to enjoy his drink instead. Cassie, meanwhile, said with a deep frown, "Isn't it too cruel to subject your children to such fate?" And without even giving them a choice, only 1 out of 3 aspirants survives the first nightmare. Of course, that strongly depends on how well prepared they are, so the number should be less gruesome among the legacies. But still, what kind of parent would do something like that to their child? Naphis lingered for a while, then sighed. It all depends on your point of view. Sure, it might seem cruel to some, but some might see it as giving their child a chance to grow strong in a world that is not kind to the powerless. Legacies are a warrior caste, at their core. They were born from a ruthless war, one that almost destroyed all of humanity. I can understand why they value strength and duty above all else. All that talk about parents and children brought Sunny into a dark mood. He was 20 now. He was more or less an adult. In fact, he was already older than his mother had been when she had him. This realization made him feel very strange. Sunny stared into his glass for a few minutes, with a grim expression, then sighed and stood up. "I'll be back in a few." With that, he left his friends and went away in search of a bathroom. In truth, he just wanted to be alone for a bit. Soon, he was staring at his reflection as the water was running from an exquisite brass faucet. The young man staring at him from the mirror did not seem amused. Sunny frowned, thinking about whether Mordred was hiding somewhere in the mirror. It had become a habit of his to consider such things from time to time. Luckily this time, the Prince of Nothing seemed to be nowhere to be found. Sunny sighed in relief, and then left the bathroom to return to the VIP lounge. On his way, however, he encountered a small disturbance. A group of young men and women were blocking his way, discussing something with one of the club's employees in loud voices. Their clothes looked extremely expensive, and their appearance was impeccably high class. As he came closer, he heard the most extravagant-looking member of the group saying with outrage, "What do you mean you can't let us inside? This is our usual spot. I can see from here that there's plenty of room left in the lounge. The beautiful ladies inside wouldn't mind some company, I'm sure. Actually, I am willing to bet that my friend and I can show them far greater time than their present companion." The hostess looked at him and said in an awkward tone, "Sir, I am very sorry, but the whole VIP lounge was reserved by the esteemed guests." The young man scoffed. "Esteemed guests? Do you even know who I am? I sincerely doubt that anyone in this ramshackle parlor of yours has more esteem than I." Sunny sighed, approached the group of young people, and patted the loudmouth on the shoulder. The young men looked down in confusion, then frowned. "I suggest you unhand me, friend. What do you want?" Sunny smiled. "Relax, buddy. I just want to give you a small piece of advice." He hugged the young man with one arm, turned him to face the VIP lounge, and pointed at Nephis, Cassie, Effie, and Kai, who could barely be seen from that spot. "Do you see these people? Do you know who they are?" The loudmouth scowled, then thought for a moment and asked with curiosity, "Oh, you know these beauties? Who are they?" Sunny's grin grew wider. "Well, let me tell you, they are all experienced murderers and killers. I once saw the tall one tear a fallen beast apart, devour its meat, and gnaw on its bones. The pretty guy next to her used to be nice, but after being burned alive and having his skin replaced with primitive grafts by an unlicensed medical practitioner, he developed some strange ideas. That delicate blonde girl is actually the most terrifying. There are 50 powerful awakened that follow her around like lost puppies and eat from the palm of her hand, all willing to obey her commands. Every one of them is a maniac. That stunning, incredible beauty next to her boy, I don't even know where to start. She was contemplating killing everyone in this club just half an hour ago. Luckily, we managed to distract her." With each word, the young man grew paler and paler. His friends were suddenly silent too, When Sunny was done speaking, the loudmouth nervously looked at the pale hand that was resting on his shoulder and asked in a small voice, and who might you be?" Sunny smiled brilliantly. "Me? Oh, I live with two of these girls. I have a nice house, with very special facilities of the underground kind, if you know what I mean. The third, I had to spend almost a month locked in a cage with that one. Gods, that was rough. As for the skin graft guy, he drives me around." The young man turned slightly green, then gently moved Sunny's hand off his shoulder and backed away. I see. Thank you very much for the advice, FR, sir. On second thought, we should be going. Oh my, look at the time." His group suddenly disappeared, as if they had never been there in the first place. Sunny looked at the hostess and shrugged. "Well, whatever. By the way, we're out of snacks. Could you bring us some more? Just no honey, please." Chapter 795. Moment of Peace. To Sunny's absolute shock, nothing really happened for the rest of the night. There was no deadly brawl that forced the cohort to intervene. No emissary of the great clans arrived to crash the party. No gate opened right in front of the club. He had been fully prepared for something to go terribly wrong, but in the end, nothing did. How odd. The five masters simply had a good time listening to loud music, being served delicious drinks and food, and enjoying each other's company. Sunny did not know if this outing was helping Nephis in a way that she had hoped it would, but he found it unexpectedly relaxing. Spending quality time with good friends was what normal humans were supposed to enjoy, after all. However, he had never had such an opportunity as a mundane. Sunny had never really fit into any of the groups he had tried to become a part of in the outskirts. He had always existed on their periphery before being expelled from them, as if something about him caused a subconscious rejection. He did not really know what had changed. Maybe it was the people he was with, or maybe it was the circumstances that had brought them together. Most likely, it was Sunny himself that had become different. In any case, for the first time in his life, he felt safe and secure about his place. He felt as if he truly belonged with these people. That did not mean that they were connected at the hip, of course. In fact, the members of the cohort had plenty of differences and underlying conflicts that had the potential to push them away from each other. Even the phrase itself was not exactly accurate at this point. They were not really members of a distinct cohort anymore. Even if all five chose to pursue the same goal together, which was rather improbable, masters rarely operated in groups. They were too rare and powerful for such an arrangement. Most Ascended acted independently, only gathering together to face especially terrible threats. But that was all right. This was how mature relationships were supposed to work. Sunny and his friends did not have to spend every waking minute together to preserve their bond. It was deep and tempered enough to remain strong, even if each of them walked their separate path from now on. Still, the prospect of separation made Sunny feel wistful. He would have preferred for the five of them to stay together, at least in some capacity. However, the future was too obscure. Until the fateful ball, it was hard to say in which direction their lives would go. That was why this rare moment was so precious. Throwing all serious thoughts out of his mind, Sunny relaxed and tried to enjoy it as much as he could. Who knew when they would have a chance to spend such a peaceful evening together again, if ever? Steel was once again striking against steel in the underground dojo. Well, alloy was striking against alloy, to be more precise. For once, Sunny was not suffering on the receiving end of Changing Star's assault. The slender young woman was actually sitting on top of his inactive sleeping pod, with her eyes closed, meditating as she controlled the soul essence rushing through her body. Instead, Sunny was defending himself against earnest, but amateurish attacks delivered by Rain. What a nice change of pace. The teenage girl was trying her best to get through his defense, but even when Sunny drastically toned down his speed and strength, her efforts were simply not enough. Despite her hard work, outstanding talent, and the swift improvement she had made, Rain was like an open book for him. Of course, he couldn't expect much from a mundane teenager. Still, her performance today was far from stellar. Sunny frowned. "Concentrate, you are distracted." Rain gritted her teeth and tried, but her mind was obviously elsewhere. A few minutes later, he was forced to command her to stop and stared at his pupil with dissatisfaction. "Are you going to take it seriously or not? What is wrong with you today?" Sunny knew that he had lucked out with his student. Unlike most teenagers, Rain had never given him any trouble with regard to her diligence and motivation. It was only natural for her to try and slack off eventually, but he had already gotten used to his sister giving it her all during their lessons. Now, nothing short of excellence would do. Rain breathed heavily, then threw a furtive glance at the alcove containing the sleeping pod and the dreamscape pod. Her cheeks turned slightly red. "Sorry, I can't. Lady Changing Star is here." Sunny scowled. "What about her?" The teenage girl looked at him with embarrassment and then said in a small voice, "You don't get it. She's watching." Sunny blinked a couple of times and then stared at her in confusion. Her eyes are closed, and anyway you can't fight properly because someone is watching? Are you kidding me? Do you think that battles happen in private or something? Rain shook her head. It's not just someone, it's the Changing Star. She is, famous. Sunny scratched the back of his head. I am famous too, you know. But look at Nephis. She is somewhat of my #1 fan, as it turns out, yet she is practicing diligently, without letting anything distract her. She is not starstruck at all. The teenage girl shook her head again. It's different. I know that you are a big deal. I am also used to seeing Effie and Lady Cassia, even Knight. But Lady Nephis is on a whole other level. She's not just a celebrity, she actually matters. She is one of the mostest people. Sunny glared at his little sister. Actually matters. Ouch. He sighed, then lowered his alloy stick and summoned the endless spring. I guess we're going to have a different kind of lesson today. Sunny put a hand on Rain's shoulder and pointed at Nephis. You're a smart kid, Rain. Your father works for the government. You should be able to separate truth from propaganda. Sure, Neph is an extraordinary individual, and she achieved a lot of incredible things, but she is just a human. All that stuff that is clouding your head is just an illusion that other humans created to shove an uplifting narrative down the population's throat. You can't be that gullible and believe in things that aren't real. The teenage girl remained silent for a bit, then frowned. But these things are real. Whether they are true or not, people believe in them, so they're real. Chapter 796, Real Deal. Sunny tilted his head a little. What do you mean? Rain glanced at him and shrugged. It is because my father works for the government that I know this stuff. Well, let's say that millions of people believe that Lady Nephis is the hero that is going to lead humanity to conquer the fourth nightmare. It doesn't matter if she truly is. As long as people believe it, she has influence over them. Her image might be an illusion, but that influence is real. Which means that her power is also real. Do you understand? He stared at her in bewilderment. So you are saying that just because someone decided to make Neph into a powerful hero and manipulated people into believing that she actually became one? Rain nodded. Think about it. If Lady Nephis decides to appear in public tomorrow and appeal for people to take arms and join the government army, tens of thousands of new recruits will answer the call. Maybe even hundreds of thousands. How can something that can affect hundreds of thousands of lives not be real? So, she is different from a celebrity like Knight, or a master like you. She is the real deal. Sunny scratched the back of his head. Why am I getting schooled by my student? About lies and deceit of all things. The worst part of it was that Rain made a lot of sense. Power was an elusive concept. So was the difference between the real and the unreal. It was easy to point at an object and say that it was real. One could see it, touch it, and break it. But what about less tangible things? Was friendship real? Or love? Or belief, for example? If belief in something could affect millions of people, cause them to throw themselves into a war, persecute a group of individuals, or build incredible miracles of architecture, it was indeed stupid to say that the thing they believed in was not real. Since it was able to exert influence on the real world, the object of their belief stopped being an illusion and became something different. Something like a deity? Sunny frowned. What the hell am I thinking about? I was supposed to discipline my lazy student, not go on a philosophical tangent about the nature of divinity. It did not apply to actual gods anyway. When they had been alive, the gods did not care about who believed in them and why. Why would they if their power had been born long before humanity even existed? At that point, Nephis suddenly turned her head and said without opening her eyes, "You talk too much. Keep swinging that sword, Rain." The teenage girl flinched and obediently raised her weapon. "Yes, Lady Nephis." Sunny opened his mouth. "Wait, who's the teacher here?" Neph, meanwhile, lingered for a moment and added, "The power you talk about might be real, but it is fragile and insubstantial. It can be broken just as easily as it was created, unless the person wielding it has actual strength to defend it. At the end of the day, nothing that has been handed to you is as valuable as what you have nurtured and cultivated yourself, so don't slack off in your training." Her expression softened a little, and the corner of her mouth curved upward. "You are doing very well already. Just continue practicing with the same determination." A bright smile suddenly appeared on Rain's face. "Really? You really think so?" Sunny said so too. "He said that I am way better than he was." Nephis slowly shook her head. "Sunny did not have a systematic education and the solid foundation that you enjoy. He never had a proper teacher, let alone a personal tutor. And yet, he has achieved so much in such a short time. You are far from his level for now. Even if you catch up to his corresponding accomplishments, it won't be enough. With your background and advantages, the only acceptable result is to surpass them." Sunny scoffed. "Yeah, no way that happens." Rain threw an angry look at him and then said defensively, "But I am not even a sleeper. I don't have a soul core in an aspect. I can't do what he did." Neph opened her eyes and looked at the teenage girl somberly. "It doesn't matter if you are an awakened, a sleeper, or a mundane human. Chances are, you won't even be infected by the spell. That doesn't mean that you have an excuse to remain weak. In fact, that only makes your need to grow stronger more dire." She sighed. "Most people in this world are mundane, and yet they face the same dangers. I've known many brave individuals who did not possess supernatural strength or a powerful aspect. It takes a lot of courage to resist the tyranny of the spell without them. Those people might have not wielded weapons or fought on the front lines of this war, but they were more courageous than most awakened I've seen. And the impact they made was no less real." Nephis closed her eyes again and resumed cycling her essence. "Strength is strength. Whether you become an awakened or not, you'll need it. So train earnestly. Don't let my presence distract you." Sunny felt like he urgently needed to say something. He cleared his throat and looked at Rain solemnly. Yeah. This world is not kind to the weak. Well, this wasn't that the reason you asked me to train you in the first place, so stop staring at Neph and get to work." The teenage girl hesitated for a few moments and then bowed. "Thank you, Grand Teacher." Sunny ground his teeth. "What? Why don't I get a thank you? What the hell?" The alloy stick in his hand came to life, shooting forward to strike Rain on the shoulder. However, the girl had not let down her guard. Reacting with surprising speed, she sidestepped his attack and deflected the stick with her training sword, then counterattacked. Sunny almost got hit in the nose. He hid his surprise and continued pressuring his student. Well, whatever just happened appears to have worked. Rain did not seem distracted anymore, at least. Chapter 797, Different Side. On a cold winter morning, two people were making their way through the black slush that drowned a rundown street, piling high near the dirty walls of the cheap panel buildings that clung to each other, as if for warmth. The loud sound of their steps echoed in the dim twilight, making it seem as if a monster was chewing on rotten flesh. Nephis glanced at the dirt covering her expensive boots, then smelled the air and grimaced. Adjusting the collar of her white coat, she then glanced at Sunny and asked, "Why are we here exactly?" He shoved his hands into his pockets and shrugged. "Weren't you told to submerge yourself into how mundane humans live? Well, here we are. This is life too." He gestured at the ugly landscape that surrounded them and sighed. After several years, Sunny was back in the outskirts. Brings back memories. In the aftermath of the collapse of old humanity, ravages of war and natural cataclysms made most of the planet uninhabitable. To exist in relative safety, people had to congregate in large cities like the one he had grown up in, the Northern Quadrant siege capital. Everywhere else was either drowned underwater or looked like a desert. Of course, life persisted. Some trees and plants were still clinging to life. Large mammals mostly went extinct, but a few species of animals and insects had managed to adapt. However, the damage to most ecosystems was too severe. The earth turned barren, the water turned poisonous, and even the air itself was not safe to breathe anymore. Luckily, humans had technology to help them survive. The city incorporated sophisticated water filtration systems, food distribution infrastructure, and other means of keeping the population alive. It was surrounded by tall barrier walls that prevented excessive microdust, various toxins, stray remnants of weaponized bacteria, harmful radiation, and other hazards from getting into the air supply. Sunny did not know much about how the barriers worked, but they were sufficiently effective in keeping the city in a bubble of breathable air. Of course, each district also possessed its own additional means of purifying the air even further. The problem, however, was that the barriers were stationary while the city was not. The human population across the planet had dropped, but here in NQSC it was slowly growing. As a result, the city grew too. It stretched further and further, both into the sky and underground. Of course, it also sprawled horizontally. Eventually, the city had outgrown the circle of barriers. Hence, the outskirts appeared. Although there were new barrier walls in construction, their completion required vast amounts of funding, human resources, and even more time. The colossal, skeletal frames of the barriers had loomed above the outskirts for as long as Sunny could remember, unfinished. With what he knew now, he doubted that they would ever be completed at all. In any case, whole generations of people like him had already lived and died outside their protection. The air in the outskirts might not have been as bad as in the desolate wilderness beyond, but it was far from safe. Those who breathed it every day did not tend to enjoy good health or long lives. It reeked. Breathing in the familiar stench, Sunny struggled not to follow Neff's example and grimace. He had been accustomed to the smell for most of his life and never paid it much attention, but just a few years of sweet life in the dream realm and in the better parts of the city made it seem rather intense. What's the big deal? It's not that bad in winter anyway. Just like the air, all other facets of life in the outskirts were barely suited for human life as well. The buildings were straining to keep themselves together, clean water was scarce. Most food came in the form of synth-paste rations provided by the government. Everything was dirty, worn out, and on the verge of collapse. The infrastructure barely functioned. Theoretically, there was supposed to be a working transportation system with connections to the rest of the city, but in practice it broke down and malfunctioned so often that getting anywhere with its help was hard. That was the reason why Sunny and Nephis were currently on foot. He did not regret this turn of events, however, because that gave them the chance to get a good look at people who lived in the outskirts. Just like the slums themselves, the inhabitants looked decrepit. They were all frail, thin, and with unhealthy skin. The most striking difference was their height. People who lived in the outskirts were much shorter than those who lived in the inner city, mostly due to malnourishment and sickness. In short, they all looked similar to how Sunny had been before the first nightmare. Looking at them now, he couldn't help but think of his past. Only 3 years and a few months ago he had left this place, thinking that he would never return. But Sunny was already a very different person. He saw the familiar sights differently too. This is so strange. Sunny had always thought of himself as someone from the outskirts, but now, after traveling through several regions of the dream realm and building a life for himself in the city, Sunny suddenly understood that the outskirts were not a monolithic place. They were actually vast and encompassed numerous different areas. He had only ever known and explored a small part of them. The only world he had known for most of his life was even smaller than he had thought. How could it not be so? Sunny had never considered such things, but after his last conversation with Master Jet, he realized the true scope of it all. From what she had told him, there were somewhere between 60 and 70 million people living in the outskirts. 20% of the total population of the city existed in these unpleasant conditions, barely surviving as they were slowly ground to dust. If the mass evacuation from Antarctica succeeded, that number was going to grow even further. The outskirts were much greater than Sunny had ever thought. More than that, every city that remained on Earth had its own version of them, even if the excess population of NQSC was by far the largest. Thinking about all the struggle, misery, and desperate hope that surrounded him, Sunny sighed. People were people, even in this pit, They found ways to adapt and find moments of happiness. They never lost their motivation to live and seek purpose. It's just that those moments were rare, and their lives were usually on the shorter side. His family had not been unhappy until it was destroyed. People more lucky than him could have a semblance of a decent life even in the outskirts, although their chances were slim. Nephis grew silent, observing the inhabitants of the outskirts with her usual distant expression. However, there was a hint of emotion hiding deep in her eyes. After a while, she turned to Sunny and asked, "Are we here to just walk around?" He looked forward, then shook his head. "No, we came here for a reason." Chapter 798, Lonely Tree. Soon, the narrow street they were walking on made way for a small lot. Spaces like these were not rare in the outskirts, since no one really bothered with city planning here. The mess of streets and alleys grew chaotically, with many of them being nothing but an accidental result of tall buildings, factories, and massive human hives being constructed in close proximity to each other. As a result, there were plenty of random gaps like this one around. What made the empty lot special, however, was that it had somehow turned into a small park. Greenery was exceedingly rare in the outskirts, which made the park especially precious. The modest space in front of them was currently covered by dirty snow, but come spring, patches of real grass were going to appear from beneath it. There were a few bushes, a frozen pond, and a lonely tree that somehow clung to life despite all reason. Currently, it stood bare and dark, devoid of the bright crown of its leaves. The park was surrounded by tall buildings, making it seem as if it was situated on the bottom of a deep well. Sparse sunlight fell on the tree from far above, illuminating its thin branches and the gray snowflakes that swirled in the air around them. There were several clean pathways through the snow, as well as a few damaged and vandalized benches here and there. Several people were sitting on the benches, enjoying a quiet moment of respite. They gave the young woman dressed in white and the young man dressed in black uneasy looks. Nephis studied the park for a few moments, then glanced at Sunny. "Aren't you wary that something can happen?" He took a look at her, then at himself. Both were obviously out of place, considering their physical appearance and expensive clothes. Everything about them screamed of wealth, status, and citizenship. Sunny doubted that the inhabitants of the outskirts would recognize them as ascended, but they would inevitably come to the conclusion that the strangers were rich. He shrugged. "What can happen? Even if some idiots decide to try and rob us, the worst they can do is shoot at us with cheap firearms. I doubt that their bullets can bruise our skin, let alone penetrate it. One would have to use a heavy assault vehicle with state-of-the-art magnetic cannon, or better yet, a spell-tech armament, to leave a small scratch on the body of a master. Even then, landing a shot would not be easy." Nephis shook her head. "I'm not worried about us. I'm worried about the idiots." Sunny smiled. "Well, don't be. If there is one thing we outskirt rats are good at, it's self-preservation. Anyone can see that both of us are killers. They'll stay away." Changing Star gave him a hesitant nod. A few moments later she asked, "So what is the reason?" He lingered for a moment, then shrugged. "I met your mother already. So I thought I would bring you to meet mine." Nephis raised an eyebrow. "I thought your mother was dead." Sunny nodded. "She is. Come." He headed toward the tree, knowing that Neph would follow. As they approached, Sunny sighed and said in a neutral tone, "Most people in the outskirts don't get to have a burial, so there are no graves either. Space is a precious commodity. Energy and fuel are too. Human remains are usually dissolved and then discarded. Still, it is nice to have a special place to remember them by. This tree is such a place for me. A long time ago, I carved 2 lines into it, one for my mom and one for my dad." He stopped and stared at the tree, a distant expression appearing on his face. In truth, Sunny had been thinking about his mother a lot recently, and that prompted him to visit the small park. Taking Nephis along was just an afterthought. He had decided that showing her the hidden side of the city would do her some good. It could give her perspective at least. As they stood silently under the tree, Nephis studied it for a while, and then suddenly said, "There are 3 lines." Sunny looked at her in confusion. "What?" Neph pointed to the bottom of the trunk. "There is a 3rd line." He stared at her for a moment, then turned away. "Oh, the 3rd line is for me. I added it before going away to face the first nightmare. Changing Star glanced at him, then asked in her usual even tone, "Were you not confident of conquering it?" Sunny laughed. "Gods, no. I was pretty sure that I would die. I was ready to. Actually, back then, I was sort of ambivalent about life, I guess. Very few people from the outskirts survive their nightmares. We are physically weak and less educated than proper citizens. Local schools are not exactly known for training skilled fighters." He remained silent for a moment, and then added, "It's weird, actually. A large part of why I survived the first nightmare was exactly because I did not really care to survive, since I already accepted that I would die. I did not worry too much about anything. No matter what happened, I was able to calmly react instead of panicking. I acted with unrestrained coldness and calculation." Sunny sighed. "Of course, such an attitude is of limited utility. It helped me at the start. But one can't get far by acting like a walking corpse. It was only halfway through the nightmare that I suddenly decided that I wanted to live. And once I did, I really, really wanted to live. That was what pushed me to go on despite all reason, and eventually escape." He looked at the lonely tree, lingered, and said, "I haven't been back here since. When I was carving the third line for myself, I had no idea that I would return one day as a master, let alone one with the special strategic asset designation and enough value to make both the government and the great clans fight over me." Sunny shook his head and grinned. "What a strange turn of events, huh?" Chapter 799. Outskirt Rat. They stood silently under the tree for a while. Eventually Nephis looked at him and said evenly, "You did well." Sunny glanced at her with a pale smile, then nodded. "I guess I did, didn't I? My mom would have been very happy, if she was alive, that is. I am healthy, well-fed, and have a house in a good part of the city. I even found my student. These things might not sound like much to you, but to her they would have been like a dream." He turned to the tree and added after a short pause, "I don't really remember my dad too well, because I was too little when he passed away. But my mom, I remember her perfectly. She was like a ray of sunshine. The strangest thing, though, is that when I was a kid, she was the whole world to me. I thought that she knew everything, could do anything, but now I realize that she was barely older than we are. She was more or less a kid herself." Nephis looked at him and said, "But we aren't kids." Sunny tilted his head, then shrugged. "That is true, I guess. We are adults, which is a strange thought. I don't really feel very different from how I was before, at least not in terms of being confident and knowing what the hell I am doing." Changing Star sighed, then shook her head a little. "That is because you have been an adult for a long time. People like us have to grow up early." Sunny thought about it for a moment. "I don't know. I have a suspicion that when I look back on today in a decade or so, I will be dismayed by how big of an idiot I was." Nephis smiled with the corner of her mouth. "That has nothing to do with adulthood." He spared her a short glance and scoffed. "That was the point where you were supposed to say that I am not an idiot, you know?" She stared at him with a deadpan expression, then said in her usual tone, "I know." Sunny couldn't help but laugh. "Anyway, I don't really understand why I wanted to come here. I guess I expected to feel something and I do. It's just not what I thought I would feel." Nephis lingered for a few moments. Eventually she said with a hint of hesitation in her voice, "Do you maybe want to say something to your mother?" Sunny lingered for a while, then shook his head. "What is the point? She is dead and the dead can't hear anything. They are simply gone. They only exist in the memories of the past. I would rather concentrate on the future." Despite the fact that he had achieved many things that his mother would have wanted for him, it had not been without a cost. His house, his wealth, and the fridge full of food he had back home were only one side of his life. The other side was full of dire things like the sovereigns, the Obel scale. And Nephis, his bond with her was a dire thing too. His future was not cloudless at all. The past few weeks had been some of the calmest and most enjoyable in Sunny's life. He had mostly been in Neff's company, doing nothing but training and spending time with her. He had hidden his head in the sand and refused to think about all the troubles that loomed on the horizon. That pleasant time was coming to an end. In a few days, Nephis was going to finally leave to face the Firekeepers. About a week after that, They were going to accept Clan Valor's invitation and attend their ball. After that, everything was going to change. Their futures were going to be decided on that day. Sunny found himself standing at a crossroad, not knowing where any of the roads actually led. Even worse, he was not the only one making the decision on what turn to take. All of it was so tiresome. He sighed, then walked over to the tree and touched it for a brief moment. "Hey, Mom, it's me. I am doing well, I guess. Rain is well, too. She looks like you very much. You would have been really proud of her." Sunny felt rather stupid at that moment, but at the same time, strangely soothed. He hesitated for a few seconds, and then thought, "Anyway, I don't think I will be able to visit again for a long time. Not that you're really here. Oh, that young woman right there is Naphis. She is it's complicated. In any case, I think you would have liked her. I have several other friends, too. So I'm in good hands. You don't have to worry about me." With that, he stepped back, looked at the lonely tree one last time, and turned away. "Let's go." As they walked away, Neff looked at him and asked tentatively, "Are you all right?" Sunny smiled crookedly and shrugged. "Of course. Why wouldn't I be?" She opened her mouth to say something, but at that moment, several figures suddenly appeared from behind a corner, surrounding them. They were all dirty and disheveled, looking like typical outskirts thugs. The leader, a muscular man with a chemical scar on his face, pointed a kinetic handgun at them and grinned. "Not so fast, lovebirds. Rich kids like you really should think twice before coming to where you don't belong." Sunny silently palmed his face. "So why don't you give us your communicators and other valuables before something bad happens? Damn it, this is so embarrassing." Before the thug was done speaking, Sunny appeared near him, grabbed the barrel of his gun and squeezed gently, turning it into a deformed steel pancake. The muscular man stared at his weapon in shock, then suddenly let go of it and jumped back. Awakened. Run. The thugs all froze for a second, then paled and dashed away, disappearing as fast as they had appeared a few moments ago. Sunny was left standing with a broken gun in his hand. He sighed heavily, then threw it into a rusty trash container that stood a couple dozen meters away. The gun clanked against its edge as it disappeared inside. Unbelievable. The most disheartening thing about it all was that he knew the leader of the thugs. Growing up in this area of the outskirts, Sunny had run into this particular gang more than once, sometimes being mistreated by them, sometimes running small errands for the thugs in hopes of earning some food. And yet none of them had recognized him, instead mistaking Sunny for a rich city kid. He looked at Nephis and cleared his throat. Sorry about that." She shook her head. "No need to apologize." Sunny hesitated for a moment, then shrugged and continued walking away from the park. "I guess I am really not an outskirt rat anymore." Chapter 800, Facing the Music. A few days passed in pleasant tranquility. Eventually, however, the time ran out. Nephis gathered her things and left for the Immortal Flame Manor, leaving Sunny alone. It was a bittersweet feeling, sweet because he finally had the house for himself once again. Bitter because, well, Sunny was not sure that he enjoyed his home being so empty anymore. Nevertheless, he had chosen not to follow her to join the rest of the cohort yet. Sunny felt like the looming ball was going to change a lot of things and had to prepare a few contingencies. If the worst happened, there was a big possibility that he would be gone for a very long time again. There were several things he had to do, just in case. His lecture course at the academy had just started, but at this rate, it was under threat of ending prematurely. Sunny spent some time imparting his students with the best and most essential knowledge he could relay in such a short amount of time. But other than that, there was not much else he could do to prevent his academic reputation from potentially receiving a hit. Luckily, all masters led hectic lives. The administration was long accustomed to their star lecturers disappearing for months on end without much of a warning, so his case was not unique. His second worry was the brilliant Emporium. The memory store was already in a difficult position because of the invisible blockade that had prevented Sunny from visiting the Dream Realm and hunting down nightmare creatures for half a year. Their inventory was running low. In the past 6 months, Sunny had slowly shifted his business in the direction of selling memory versions of mundane items that he weaved. That was not a straightforward endeavor, however. Sure, the idea of having a toothbrush memory sounded pleasant, but he had to use a soul shard to create one. Considering how expensive soul shards were in the real world, the price of a simple toothbrush would have been simply unreasonable. So, after thinking for a while, Sonny had come up with a strategy of shifting his focus from necessities and toiletries to luxury items. That way, he could price them high enough to earn more than the price of a soul shard. Rich clients already had access to mundane items in the dream realm due to their connections to masters and saints, but were willing to pay a lot for the convenience of having various luxuries readily at hand. So, Sonny spent a few days painstakingly creating an especially large batch of these extravagant memories, and then met with Aiko to transfer them. After thinking for a while, he gave her a strange set of instructions. Sonny wanted the brilliant Emporium to stock up on as many memories that provided either warmth or resistance against cold as possible. The second priority went to memories that could serve as a source of light, which were usually cheap and plentiful. He also told Aiko to sell every soul shard they had left. The reason behind this decision was simple: the approaching disaster in Antarctica. Once the government announced the voluntary mobilization, a lot of people were going to need to equip themselves for the harsh realities of polar night. The large amount of opening gates would also flood the market with soul shards, probably crashing their price to a certain extent. In any case, he hoped that the brilliant Emporium would survive for a while thanks to these measures, should something happen at the ball. Lastly, there was Rain. His sister was going to turn 16 in a few months, which meant that Sonny had very little time left to prepare her for the potential first nightmare. On the other hand, there were not a lot of things left that he could teach her. Of course, Rain still had a lot of room to improve, but at that stage, Sonny's presence was only of marginal use. What she really needed to do was to truly internalize and assimilate the skills and knowledge that he had already imparted to her. While Sonny could help his sister along, most of the work had to be done by Rain herself. Still, he used the week before the ball to the fullest extent. The teenage girl might have been sour about how intense their lessons suddenly became, but it was for her own good. She was already better prepared to face the nightmare than he had been by far. Whether or not that would be enough, he did not know. Other than these three things, there was not a lot for Sonny to do. He prepared his home to go into conservation mode in case he did not return from the ball. He restocked the covetous coffer with various supplies for a long expedition. He fought against Saint to clean the rust off his battle instincts. He tinkered with his memories for a bit, trying to improve them. All of these preparations might have been for nothing. But Sonny was more willing to be wrong than to be unprepared. Finally, the fateful day came. Wincing at the thought of how much money he had spent on that thing, Sonny donned a stylish black suit and briefly looked at himself in the mirror. The bespoke attire had been made by a luxury establishment that serviced many prominent legacies and incorporated the most rare and durable materials, many of them coming from the dream realm. The suit was made in the style that many awakened preferred, existing somewhere between the modern fashion and the more antiquated aesthetic that memories adhered to. It was elegant and fitting, including a stylish half-cape and tall leather boots. Even though Sonny had said a few strong words to Kai during the fittings, now that he looked at himself, he could not deny that he looked rather good. Sonny lingered for a few moments, then sighed. Let's face the music, I guess. With that, he briefly circulated essence through the coils of Soul Serpent, wrapped 3 of the 4 shadows around his body, and walked outside. His carriage, in the form of a luxury PTV, was already waiting.